Multiverses have become recently popular, as they give the creators the chance to have some fun without being beholden to canon, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the Age of Apocalypse, a crossover event that explores a Marvel universe where Charles Xavier does not form the X-Men because he's killed by Legion in the past. So today, we're going to explore this supermassive, ultra-crazy and exhilarating storyline in detail. Without further ado, let's begin, shall we? X-Men, The Complete Age of Apocalypse, Epic TPB number 1. To keep things easy and understandable, we'll start with the prequels that set up this massive crossover event that briefly replaced Earth 616, the prime reality, with Earth 295. Prequel Part 1, Sins of the Father, X-Men 96, number 1. The story begins with the aptly named Ultimate Mutant X-Man, Earth 295's version of Cable named Nate Gray, trying to get back into his reality, which is the titular Age of Apocalypse, a timeline where the mutant tyrant Apocalypse rules an alternate Earth. He triangulates the location of a portal to his timeline all the way to Genosha, an island nation where the villain Sugarman, another resident of the Apocalypse era, is powering up the gateway using bred mutants. X-Man confront Sugarman and his lackeys, but they seem to be no match, as the hero deflects oncoming bullets to free the bred mutants. However, Sugarman manages to distract X-Man, and the henchmen manage to get their shots in, compelling X-Man to use his powers and inadvertently charge up the gateway. Afraid that the Age of Apocalypse will be triggered again, X-Man, or Nate, goes through the gateway and ends up back in his home world, where he's saved from drowning by Magneto. Although Nate doesn't trust Magneto, his suspicions are soon quelled by a familiar face, the mutant Forge. They're both happy to see each other, but Nate soon notices that Forge does not have his trademark cybernetic eye, which leads Nate to believe that he's moved through time as well as space before the start of the Age of Apocalypse. He recounts the events to Forge, to which Forge replies that he already knows because he was told by Nate the last time. As Forge fills Nate in on the details of his previous visits, we see Sugarman seemingly infect Wingard as part of his larger plan. Seeing certain symptoms of the virus arise, it's revealed that one of Sugarman's henchmen is actually Morph in disguise, who attempts to rescue Wingard after he's discovered. Luckily, X-Man, Forge and Magneto show up just in time to aid in the rescue effort. While the battle ensues, Forge discovers that Sugarman's real plan was to release an even deadlier strain of Apocalypse's virus. X-Man has to contain the virus by himself before it spreads, and although it's an almost deadly feat, he's successful with a little help from Magneto. This, however, drives a rift between Forge and Magneto, and he leaves with the contained virus. Forge tells Nate he needs to charge up the gateway again, but he refuses to do so at first. But because of his future self's own clever plans set in place, a ruse from Wingard and Forge gets him to charge up the gateway. And on a reluctant note, he's thrown back into the main 616 reality, where Nate vows to find his friend and mentor, Forge, yet again. Prequel Part 2, Blink, number 1. This prequel issue, which serves as the first of 4 starring the teleporting mutant Blink, takes place in Dallas, Texas, during the dark days of the genetic war, where humans have been enslaved by mutants under the leadership of Apocalypse. Resisting his reign is a small team of X-Men led by Magneto. The story starts with Rogue and Morph mid-battle, trying to assess their options. They look to Blink for help, but she's nowhere to be found. Turns out, Blink is out looking for a mutant named the Dark Beast. She finds a trapped humanoid at one of Apocalypse's facilities, where the Dark Beast calls in and explains that he's been experimenting on this creature, an alien whose species all share the same DNA, which means that he can make an army of copies from one single person. Blink, in an effort to save the tortured alien, teleports him to somewhere unknown. A week later, Blink meets up with Magneto, where he admonishes her for leaving Rogue and Morph to fend for themselves, and warns her that another act like this and she'll be off the X-Men. Blink retorts that she doesn't need anybody, as Magneto simply flies away. Later, in Manhattan, the base of Apocalypse's operations, Blink arrives and sets up an ambush. However, one of Apocalypse's horsemen named Holocaust is somehow made privy to this, and he's ready when a portal opens, bringing in an army of Bellurians from the negative zone. Holocaust is able to defeat their leader, who warns that they'll be back with the full might of their empire. As this plan fails, Blink also finds herself spotted by one of the guards, but before Holocaust can do anything, she jumps through another portal and lands into the negative zone, where she's confronted by a stranger. To add to that, the issue ends with us learning that Blink has amnesia. Prequel Part 3, Through the Looking Glass, Blink number 2. The second issue of this 4-part series starring Blink picks up right where the first issue left off, with an amnesiac Blink staring down the barrel of a gun. She's in the negative zone, where the stranger confronting her has mistaken her for an assassin. Luckily, Blink's training kicks in and she's able to disarm the stranger and take his gun from him. She doesn't kill him though, which gives the stranger enough time to retaliate. They go back and forth in combat, but soon end up in a draw with a knife to each other's throat. Blink convinces him that she means no harm, and they eventually put down their weapons and agree to talk. Before they can, however, a lava quake erupts, and the stranger saves Blink from it with the help of his steed, Morkul, the Fear Cat. Later, the pair are traveling to the more calmer provinces of the Negative Zone. The stranger, we learn, is named Amur, and as Blink tells him about what she recollects and what she doesn't, Amur reveals being haunted by similar flashes of memory or vision. They are of a conqueror driven mad, corrupted, and eventually defeated by 4 heroes in blue, the Fantastic Four. As Blink and Amur debate whether that left the Negative Zone better or worse off, Amur spots some lowlanders being attacked by Blastar's troops. Amur takes off to battle the troops, and Blink soon joins in and uses her muscle memory and training. Slowly, the more she fights, the more she has flashes of her life, and she starts to relearn how to use her powers. The two of them are able to defeat all of Blastar's troops and save the common folk, who are more than grateful. Although Blink still cannot explain her powers or whether she uses them for good or ill, she's happy to have helped the Lowlanders, who speak of Annihilus, their former leader. Amur explains that Annihilus was the lesser of the two evils, and that Blastar, whose troops they just fought, is the greater evil. He reveals that Blastar plans on using Annihilus's people to war against the people of Earth. Amur, however, is set on preventing that from happening by reclaiming the Negative Zone from Blastar and returning it to Annihilus. As the issue comes to a close, Blink realizes that this is her fight too. Prequel Part 4, On the Side of the Angels, Blink, number 3. Issue number 3 of this 4-part series begins with Blink in the middle of being chased by soldiers from Blastar's garrisons. This is part of a ruse to draw them out to where Amur is waiting with his rallied army from all around the Negative Zone, outnumbering Blastar's troops 250 to 1. It's also revealed that Blink and Amur are now romantically interlinked. The next part of their plan is for Blink to take out the watchtower posts so that they can breach the castle. Blink is able to do so with relative ease, and at her signal, the resistance forces storm the gates of the castle. While that's happening, Blink takes out some more guards quite easily and takes hold of the master key. She uses the key to go down into a dungeon where, despite being afraid of the dark, she manages to make it all the way down. There, she finds children of the royal family of Annihilus's loyalists who are being kept captive, starved and abused. This gives Blink a flashback of her own childhood, spent in a concentration camp run by Sugarman, who similarly abused her and her friend Ileana. She collapses into Amur's arms and wonders if she loves him or not, whether that makes any difference. 4 days later, as the pair are riding along the Glass River, Amur expresses her love to Blink, which makes her cry. However, they're taken by surprise by 2 of Blastar's soldiers and rendered unconscious. When Blink wakes up, she sees that she's been tied up alongside Amur in some sort of dark space. It's soon revealed to be an arena with a full audience, including Blastar himself. Blink confronts him about his tyrannical rule, but he retorts by saying that he's a fair ruler compared to Annihilus, and that she doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. They exchange more insults as Blastar throws her around the arena using his considerable powers, and he then tells her that her beloved Amur is actually the demon Annihilus. This comes as a shock to both Blink and Amur, and on that note, the issue comes to an end. Prequel Part 5, Full Recall, Blink number 4. The last issue of this prequel series featuring Blink starts with Amur and Blink locked up in prisons, where Amur has been going on and on about how sorry he is about unintentionally deceiving Blink, whom he loves. He reveals that when he was defeated, he regressed into a human form, with no memory of his life as Annihilus and the creation of the Annihilation Canon. Blink gives him no reply, and even refuses to look at him as he's being taken away by Blastar soldiers. Blastar arrives, and he actually confirms that Amur was telling the truth about his amnesia, but he'll be soon returned to his original state. Blastar also reveals that Amur kept Blink's quiver with him as a keepsake. Knowing that he really loves her, Blink finds her resolve and decides to save Amur. Blastar's legions start marching towards Earth, with the Annihilation Cannon in front and Amur tied to it. Amur, who's in mid-transformation, warns Blastar that using the cannon will not simply destroy Earth, it'll end all creation. Blastar explains that he doesn't care all that much, and that the device cannot function without the cosmic control rod that's joined to Amur's Annihilus's form. Meanwhile, Blink is still in prison being watched by 2 guards, who were part of the troop that was abusing the imprisoned kids. They taunt Blink and tell her that she can't do anything, as her powers are inhibited in this cell. However, Blink explains that she had a piece of sharp rock stuck in her arm during her battle with Blastar, and that she's using it to cut open her binds. The guards rush in to stop her, but are too late, and Blink is freed. Subsequently, she kicks their asses and escapes with a quiver. Furthermore, As she touches her quiver, all her lost memories come back, and she remembers who she is and how she ended up here. She claims that she has one more thing to do before heading back home. Back at the Annihilation Cannon, Blink jumps in to save Amur, and Blastar's troops ask permission to open fire on her. Blastar says there's no need, as they won't be going anywhere. As Blink learns from a transforming Amur, his being has been tied to the cannon in such a way that tampering of any kind would make the cannon go off and destroy all creation. Blink explains that they could still try, as she has 3 quiver bolts that could teleport her, Amur, and the cannon separately. The cannon to Blastar's backyard, and the 2 of them to safety. Amur pleads with her to leave, as he believes it won't work. He asks Blink to forget about him. Blink kisses him and says she'll never forget him, and then activates her bolts. She manages to teleport the cannon away and save Amur at the same time, teleporting him to safety 3 miles away. By this time, he's fully transformed back into Annihilus, and as his megalomaniac tendencies are resurfacing, he sees an image of Blink in his head, which gives him momentary peace. In the epilogue of the series, we see the X-Men from Blink's home dimension sitting at the dinner table, discussing Blink's disappearance and figuring out ways to find her. As they're at their rope's end, Blink drops directly onto the dinner table. Sabretooth asks her where she's been this whole time, and slowly Blink starts to explain the whole affair to him. He consoles her about being taken away from her love and tells her that just because it ended doesn't mean it diminishes its worth. Prequel, Part 6, Origins, X-Men Chronicles, Number 1. The story of this issue starts by giving us some background on the Magneto of Earth 295, who's disillusioned with humanity and has isolated himself on Mount Wundagore. There, he starts a school for gifted young mutants so that they can learn to be the X-Men. One such exercise of Level 1 is about to commence, led by Magneto's son, Quicksilver. Magneto wonders if he pushes them too hard, but then he remembers that it's the only way to ensure their survival. The team comprises Quicksilver, Iceman, Storm, Scarlet Witch, Jean Grey, and Colossus. They're all training in simulated battles inside a room known as the Killing Zone, and Magneto joins them after an initial assessment. He does so because he wants the X-Men to work together as a team and doesn't want to watch from the sidelines. The team manages to complete the exercise successfully. Quicksilver and Iceman celebrate. Magneto tells them that there's no reason to celebrate, as he can see nothing but overconfidence and sloppiness. He tells the computer to start a Level 4 exercise so that the team can experience real fear. He also reveals the newest member of the X-Men, who turns out to be Weapon X. Wolverine is in one of his berserker rages, completely demolishes the simulated enemies and shows the X-Men an easy victory. Magneto stops Wolverine before he can further hurt Iceman, or one of the other X-Men, by using his powers to lock Logan's adamantium body in place. He then tells Jean to use her telepathy to calm Wolverine down. Jean is barely able to do so, and Magneto then leaves the X-Men and Wolverine together to let them get to know each other, while he leaves to receive another new arrival. Meanwhile, in New York City, there are reports of sporadic mutant attacks that are driving humans to paranoia, and there have been rumors of a long-living mutant who's behind these attacks. They see a massive ship in the skies above New York, and it projects an image of Kandra, Herald of Apocalypse, who declares that the human's reign has come to an end, and the Homo Superior, or mutant, is about to take over. Back at Wundagore, Magneto is lamenting Xavier's early death, wondering about how he would have handled this looming threat. However, he doesn't have the luxury of spending too much time in grief, as he needs to come up with a good strategy. Bova comes in to inform him that Mystique is waiting for him with a young lady. This lady turns out to be Rogue, who is of particular interest to Apocalypse, which is why Mystique brings her to Magneto. Rogue is sad to see Mystique leave after dropping her off, but Mystique tells her that Magneto is a good man and he'll take care of her. She'll also find friends here, the other X-Men, and they and Magneto will teach her how to survive and use her powers. After Mystique has left, Rogue finds herself alone at Wundagore, but not for long. Iceman and Jean come in to introduce themselves, with Iceman being a bit too eager. He tries to touch Rogue's arm, which is exposed, and Rogue punches him back, saying nobody should ever touch her because she's dangerous. Magneto tells her that she's no different than anybody else here, and that he knows about her powers. He tells her that she shouldn't think of them as a curse, but rather a blessing. He assures her that together they'll find a way to control her gift, and that she'll be safe with them as they're all a family. Meanwhile, at Cape Citadel, Apocalypse's ship arrives over the stronghold of the United States nuclear defense arsenal. As alarms sound through the facility, we see Apocalypse's horsemen, Gideon, Kandra, War, Death, and Sabretooth looking down at them with amusement and disdain. Back at Wundagore, Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, is taking Rogue on a tour of the facility, explaining that this is where all the X-Men learn and train for what's to come. She tells her about Magneto, why he's a loner, and that there was a time where he had a friend who died saving his life. This is shown to be Xavier, as Magneto arrives and explains how he's been a guiding light to Magneto even after his death. At this time, Pietro arrives and tells Magneto that the apocalypse has hit Cape Citadel. Magneto figures out that he's behind the nuclear stockpile and asks Wanda to assemble the X-Men in the hangar. At Cape Citadel, the Special Forces standing guard find out that they're no match for the Horsemen, who tear through the facility's defenses with ease, even with their internal bickering. They go inside and underground to find what they're looking for. As this is happening, Magneto is using his spy satellites to watch the whole thing. Although he can't stop the massacre, he vows to avenge the dead. All the X-Men have assembled in their Blackbird ship, but Magneto chooses to leave Wanda behind to look after the facility. As the ship takes off, we see that just at the edge of the facility, the mutant Nemesis watches on with malevolent tension. When the X-Men reach Cape Citadel, they're ready for a fight, but Apocalypse's ship is nowhere to be found. Then suddenly, they're hit and ambushed by it, and Magneto lays out their plan for battle. While this is happening, Nemesis attacks the facility, destroying everything in his path. Wanda tries to enlist Rogue's help in getting the youngest students to safety, but Rogue is already in battle with Nemesis using her leftover powers absorbed from Polaris. As Nemesis takes Rogue in a hold, Wanda interrupts the battle and manages to actually hurt Nemesis, which comes as quite a surprise to him. Back at Cape Citadel, the Horsemen find the control room from where they can launch the nuclear missiles, which comes as a surprise to Sabretooth. Thought the plan was to only control them and not actually use the weapons. The other Horsemen and Apocalypse reveal that this was always part of the plan, and that they were just using Sabretooth to get into the nuclear facility. Now that his usefulness is finished, Kandra traps him in a telekinetic bubble and takes him outside with Death and War, leaving Gideon to work in the control room. Outside, however, they run into the X-Men. Kandra lets Sabretooth loose so that he can join in the battle and keep the X-Men from running into Gideon. Wolverine and Sabretooth battle it out. Storm and the others engage with Death and War, while Jean takes on Kandra, tells Magneto to deal with the missiles. He goes in to deal with Gideon, and although he seems to be winning at first, Gideon turns his own powers against him. However, Magneto manages to outsmart him and overloads him to the point that he explodes, and the missiles countdown stops. Outside as well, the X-Men are able to subdue the Horsemen, but Apocalypse soon arrives and tries to attack the X-Men from his ship. Magneto, though, manages to stop this attack, and Apocalypse flees, vowing to be back soon. Magneto explains to his X-Men that they did well today, but that it's only the beginning of their problems. They head for Wondagore, where in the wreckage of the facility, we see Rogue trying to care for a badly wounded Wanda. Wanda asks whether the children are safe, and Rogue tells her that everything is fine now, that Nemesis has gone away. With her dying breath, Wanda asks Rogue to take care of Magneto and be a friend to him, as he needs friends. The X-Men arrive, and as the issue comes to a close, we see Magneto holding Wanda's body and his resolve growing stronger about what the X-Men must do. Prequel Part 7, Sinister Bloodlines, Tales from the Age of Apocalypse, Sinister Bloodlines, Number 1. This issue of the series starts by recounting the start of Apocalypse's reign over America. It mentions the death of Charles Xavier and also how New York has been reshaped and those who still fight the reign of Apocalypse. In New York, we see a group of the Dark Lord ships chasing a rogue flyer. They manage to shoot it down and recover it to see who's inside. Meanwhile, deep within the heart of Apocalypse's Manhattan, we meet Scott and Alex Summers training together under the mentorship of Apocalypse's most trusted servant, the villain, Sinister. The point of the exercise is to fight enemies without using powers. And while Scott is winning, Alex fails and uses his powers to succeed. This prompts Sinister to demean Alex, who already lives in Scott's shadow. They're interrupted by Hank McCoy, who informs Sinister of the salvaged ship. The Summers brothers discuss McCoy's tendency to conduct twisted experiments, even on himself sometimes. Sinister and Hank go to the lab to discuss this further. The story cuts to 5 years later, where the pilot of the mysterious craft, now identified as Christopher Summers, is shown trapped in a lab. It's revealed that he's been experimented on constantly all these years, and that he's actually the father of Scott and Alex Summers, whom he was trying to smuggle out of Manhattan before Apocalypse's rise to power. Why and how that mission failed, even he doesn't know. Now he's at the end of his rope, and he decides to fight back against the owner of the lab, Hank McCoy, now in Dark Beast form. He takes Hank by surprise and manages to escape the lab, ending up in the ruins of Manhattan. There, he meets Robbie Robertson, who helps him hide from Apocalypse's troops by taking him to a hidden bunker. Chris asks Robbie what happened to this place, and as Robbie fills him in, Chris tries to remember what he was doing and how he ended up on that ship, mentioning his children. Robbie recognizes their names and tells Chris that he's not gonna like what's happened to them. To answer that question, we see Sinister assembling a task force consisting of Northstar, Aurora, the Bedlam brothers, Emplate, and the Monets to start a manhunt for Chris Summers. Scott isn't given anything to do, which he questions, and Sinister deflects which makes Scott question what exactly is wrong. But Alex is still huffing over Scott being favored, and the Bedlam brothers decide to take him with them to Warren Worthington's bar for alpha mutants called Heaven. Meanwhile, at Robertson's bunker, they find him presumably dead, which turns out to be a ruse. However, the mutants are fast enough that they kill Robbie before he can do anything. Minutes later, at the Lincoln Tunnel, M-Plate and the Monets encounter Chris Summers, who's battle-ready and manages to kill M-Plate, leaving the Monets shocked and catatonic. Before he can run away, though, Northstar and Aurora show up and are about to use their powers, but Chris blows up a gas tanker nearby and incapacitates them. He almost murders them in a fit of rage, but manages to calm down by thinking of his sons. Back at Heaven, Alex and the Bedlam brothers are having fun when Scott approaches them. He scolds Alex for not being at his post and tells him that there's been an emergency beacon from the others and they have to respond. The Summers brothers reach the site of the wreckage and find Northstar and Aurora alive but unconscious, and M-Plate and the Monets still in their previous state. They also manage to pick up Chris's trail into the Ghostlands, which is really just a big cemetery. By the time the pair reaches there, Scott figures out that whoever left this trail did so intentionally. At that moment, they find themselves face to face with Chris, and after a brief skirmish, he asks them to stop and reveals his identity to them. At first, they're reluctant to believe him, but he asks them to hear him out. He tells the story of how he was trying to escape with his wife and the two of them when their ship was accosted by a spacecraft. He threw the boys out with a parachute for safety, but he and his wife were abducted by the aliens called Shi'ar. They experimented on the couple until Chris's wife died and he was thrown in their brig. After months of being captive with other inmates of different species, the group mounted an uprising and then went on to destroy what was left of the Shi'ar Empire. However, on their way back, when the spaceship encountered Earth, Chris decided to come back to find his sons. Alex believes this story, but Scott is still skeptical. They're soon attacked by scavengers of the Ghostlands, and the three of them manage to fight them off together. Chris again almost goes into a rage, but controls himself. Because the brothers' bikes get destroyed in battle, they decide to take temporary refuge with Chris in an old church and get to know each other better. Meanwhile, back at Sinister's lab, Hank is discussing Jean as a probable mate for Scott when he mentions to Sinister how they'd react if they found out that his father had been experimented on right under their noses for the last 5 years. Sinister gets angry at Beast, but admits that he does have a point. Back at the refuge, Scott has another argument with Chris over the authenticity of his story and leaves in a fit of frustration. Chris talks to Alex and wishes he could have been there to raise them. Outside, Scott encounters a tied-up Misty Knight and lots of dead scavengers. He frees Misty and asks her what happened. She tells him that the scavengers caught her and threw her in a dumpster, but then something came in and killed them. And on their way back, they decide to leave before the thing comes back. And on their way back to the refuge, they find the body of Colleen Wing, Misty's best friend. When they arrive back at the refuge, the group finds themselves attacked by zombies, Colleen among them, which results in another fight. Overwhelmed, the group falls back but is soon cornered. Thankfully, they're saved by Sinister, who comes blasting with his ship. After they're saved, Scott confronts Sinister about why he kept Chris a secret from them. As the argument gets heated, the group notices that Chris is slowly transforming into a Shi'ar-like monster. The Summers brothers fight their father with Sinister's help. Sinister says he kept the secret because of exactly this reason from the brothers. Chris, from within the monster form, pleads to Scott to do what must be done, and Scott complies by killing him. Alex is furious at Scott for doing this, but Sinister tells them it was necessary. The brothers say farewell to their father a second time, and Alex leaves, still bitter with Scott. The issue ends with Scott taking his father's sentiments to heart and deciding to make some changes. Prequel Part 8, By the Light, Tales from the Age of Apocalypse, Number 1. The issue starts with Magneto going to Central America to mount a rescue of one of Apocalypse's critics, Robert Kelly, who's kept in a Mayan temple converted into a POW camp. On the way out, he encounters Diablo and the Absorbing Man, who try to stop him. A fight ensues, and Magneto fights Absorbing Man while Diablo gets Kelly in his clutches. Thankfully, Nightcrawler and Rogue come in as the cavalry and save the day. When they get Kelly to safety, Nightcrawler tells Magneto that he got word from Mystique about Apocalypse's whereabouts. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Scott Summers looks at Apocalypse's Horseman Death's torture chambers, Sunfire in particular, and wonders if he's actually on the right side of things in this eugenics war. Death questions his loyalty, but Scott informs him that he's simply here to oversee a transport from Apocalypse to the Black Beast. Elsewhere in Kentucky, there's a series of tunnels made by Magneto that acts as a hideout for the underground resistance against Apocalypse. Here, we see Morph disguised as the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, on his way to call Sabretooth and Blink for an emergency meeting. Sabretooth is in Blink's room trying to relieve her from her depressed state. Morph comes in to make jokes and call them, which prompts Sabretooth to get furious at him. The X-Men all convene in the war room and discuss how they're going to mount an attack on Apocalypse, who's hiding out on a ship on the blue side of the moon. On the ship, however, there's a separate game being played as Death, who's in possession of canisters of Terrigen Mist, names himself Interim Emperor, while Apocalypse is recovering. Scott is seemingly cowed by this. Back on Earth, Morph, disguised as Sabretooth, asks Blink for her help in getting the X-Men to Apocalypse's ship. Blink figures out easily enough that it's Morph and tells him that he's nice for trying and that she'll try to get them there. On the surface, Rogue consoles a moping Magneto, who she plans to have a child with once the war is over. Morph interrupts them, gushing at the romance, and Blink arrives. This gives the group the resolve they need. On Apocalypse's ship, Scott is coming to the conclusion that he needs to stand up to Death. The X-Men arrive at the ruins on the moon, under the ship's shadow. Death arrives soon enough, with his army of Inhumans, and a battle ensues. Though formidable, the X-Men are defeated and rendered unconscious. Death takes them to the ship and imprisons them. However, Morph fakes his death and instead disguises himself as Blink, allowing the real Blink a chance to escape. Shortly after, Scott encounters her and offers to help her rescue the X-Men from Death's clutches, although he tells her that Apocalypse has been transported to Earth as soon as the X-Men's presence on the moon was detected. Back on the ship, Death plans to use the Terrigen Mist to convert the X-Men into creatures that follow his orders, but Scott drops in with Blink to foil his plan. He uses his I-beam to release Sunfire, which starts going atomic. Blink concentrates hard and teleports Scott first, and then herself with the rest of the X-Men, and even Sunfire, back to Earth. The atomic blast of Sunfire's powers ends up destroying the ship and killing Death. On Earth, the X-Men arrive safely and look up at the explosion. Magneto tells Hope that with such allies forming, there may yet be hope to turn the tide of the war. Prequel Part 9, Shattered Dreams, X-Men Chronicles No. 2. The issue starts with Weapon X threatening to leave the X-Men and taking Jean Grey along with him. He's angry with Magneto and the rest of the X-Men because none of them tried to rescue her, and Logan had to go in alone and lost a hand in the process. Jean tells him there's no need for violence, and Magneto watches them as they leave. The other X-Men ask him if they can do anything, but Magneto says they should let the pair go. On their way out, Jean telepathically tells Magneto that she understands why he did what he did, and that she's going because Logan needs her more than the team does. The issue moves to Spokane, Washington, which has been completely destroyed by Holocaust, one of Apocalypse's horsemen. He orders one of his lackeys, known as Wolverine, to find Magneto and hurt him by killing his last remaining known child, Quicksilver. Meanwhile, in Denver, the X-Men arrive to take care of some bandits that have taken a group of hostages. Some of the team, like Rogue, are worried about Magneto, but the others think that he's fine. The battle is going well, so much so that a couple of the bandits decide to flee before they're noticed by the X-Men. However, Wolverine finds them before they can escape and takes over their minds and bodies. Giving them enhanced strength, he sends them out to test the X-Men. The two don't prove much of a challenge, but one of them does manage to stab Magneto in the back, at which point Gambit orders the team to retreat. Watching this, Wolverine determines that Magneto is actually closer to Gambit or Rogue than Quicksilver. Back at the X-Men's residence in New Mexico, Magneto scolds the team for retreating, but Gambit assures him that it's the right decision because they need him more than they need to defeat some random bandits. Back in Denver, Wolverine gathers the rest of the bandits to take the fight to the X-Men's doorstep. As they make their way to find the X-Men's home, Rogue tries to get Magneto to get some rest, but he's adamantly against it. She then talks to Quicksilver about how much he still misses Wanda. While this is happening, Gambit comes in, convinced about his commitment to Rogue and expressing as much to her. He also mentions that Magneto could come up with a way to help her control her powers. Rogue leaves the room upset. Quicksilver tells Gambit that he might need to talk to Magneto about this. Magneto is in training, but Gambit interrupts him to talk about Rogue. As they're discussing this, Rogue shows up and asks to talk to Magneto alone. Gambit agrees, but lurks in the shadows, eavesdropping. Magneto and Rogue talk about their feelings. He shows her a possible way of controlling her powers. Gambit jumps out of the shadows, furious about their closeness, and tells her to choose him or Magneto. Just then, Wolverine and his bandits attack the X-Men's front door, which propels them all into action. The battle is quite intense, and Wolverine comes close to killing both Gambit and Rogue, having incapacitated Magneto again. However, the team manages to do their part well and hold Wolverine at bay. However, certain choices made in battle make it clear to Gambit that Rogue cares for Magneto more than him. So, after the battle ends with Gambit taking out Wolverine for good, he decides to go his separate ways and leave the X-Men, at which point this issue comes to an end. Prequel 10, Breeding Ground, X-Men, number 1. This issue starts with Nathaniel Essex, now known as Sinister, hatching a private plan to create a superior breed of mutants without Apocalypse's knowledge. Months of stealing resources and diverting power to conduct experiments have led him to the creation and development of his ultimate specimen, a boy made from Jean Grey and Scott Summers' genes. He dubs the kid Nathan Grey, after himself and his mother. Hank McCoy, the Dark Beast of Earth 295, calls him to ask about a discrepancy, and Sinister is able to ward him off, although he can smell the suspicions arousing. During the call, Nate wanders off on his own, discovering the facility he's in through some of Scott's memories of childhood. Sinister comes in search of him, getting quite angry, but the boy placates his worries before they erupt into rage. Sinister explains to Nate that this world is not safe for him, as it's a world controlled by Apocalypse, who's currently on a path to culling the human breed. He shows Nate an image of the gene pens and suddenly finds himself and the boy transported there. Upon further inspection, he deduces that it's an involuntary triggering of Nathan's psionic powers, a form of astral projection. Sinister uses a failsafe device to bring them back, finds Nate questioning why he did that. He explains to Nathan that people are unpredictable and that they're not ready for him yet. To keep Nate happy, Sinister fabricates a teddy bear that Nate saw in the pens. This seems to be enough for now, and as dawn approaches, Sinister tells the boy to go back in his pod for recalibration. The boy complies and is put into a deep sleep again, but not before showcasing his superior telepathic powers once. This low key impresses Sinister, but it also worries him, as he only has one more chance left to reconfigure Nate in a way that keeps him from being wildly unpredictable and a time bomb, all in the efforts of One Way being able to wield him against Apocalypse one day. X-Men, The Complete Age of Apocalypse, Epic TPB, number 2, Part 1, Beginnings, X-Men, Alpha number 1. The story of the Age of Apocalypse officially begins in Seattle, where we follow a mysterious mutant on the trail of the Infinites, the soldiers of Apocalypse. It leads him to a little girl who's running away from these soldiers. Their commander, Eunice, orders the mysterious mutant to step aside or die as a traitor. The mysterious mutant doesn't budge. To add to his resolve, the X-Men show up to the scene. In the ensuing battle, Sabretooth, Rogue, Blink, Nightcrawler, Morph, Quicksilver, and Storm take on the Infinites and completely defeat them without much of a problem. Eunice seems to get the drop on Magneto with a plastic gun, but Iceman comes in clutch and saves the leader of the X-Men. Quicksilver isn't too happy about his father treating death so casually, but Magneto is in his usual mood, still lamenting Xavier's death over 20 years ago. They're informed by Blink that Sabretooth is not making any progress with the mysterious mutant. Magneto goes to him and asks for his name, at which point the mutant attacks Magneto, calling him a murderer. He mentions Legion and a warped reality before being put to sleep by Magneto. Sabretooth thinks Magneto recognized the mystery man, but Magneto denies it. Meanwhile, at a lab, Dark Beast is experimenting on Mr. Dukes, trying to make him faster and stronger. The experiment goes out of control, and Dukes attacks Beast. Alex Summers, or Havoc, comes in to try to stop it, but is overwhelmed. Both Beast and Havoc are eventually saved by Cyclops, Alex's older brother Scott. The Summers brothers start bickering about whose fault this is, since Beast was told not to conduct experiments anymore due to the Kelly Pack. They also bicker about having more authority, and Sinister, their adopted father, comes in to stop it. He also asks Scott to take a walk with him. Sinister informs him that he must go away for a while, without providing a reason, which leaves Scott confused. Meanwhile, at Club Heaven for Superior Mutants, Warren Worthington, aka Angel, informs all the club's patrons that they're safe from the Sentinels who roam the sky. There, he also meets Gambit, who asks him to arrange a meeting with Magneto. Angel agrees since he owes Gambit a favor, but only if Gambit never steps foot in heaven again. Back in Westchester, at the home of the X-Men, we see Rogue and Magneto spend a moment with their child, Charles. Rogue is still sad about not being able to touch her own child, but Magneto consoles her. They go see the stranger again, being held prisoner at the facility. He talks about Magneto's crime, but doesn't specify. Magneto tells Rogue that she must use telepathy to go into his mind and find the truth. Elsewhere, Abyss, Sinister, and Holocaust are gathered for a meeting with Apocalypse, noting the absence of Mikhail. Apocalypse says he'll be dealt with, but there are more pressing matters, like global domination, in flagrant violation of the Kelly Pact. He plans on taking both humans and mutants to the next stage in evolution, where only the fittest will survive. Sinister raises some doubts, but quickly acquiesces to the Dark Lord. However, as the meeting goes on, he does ponder about his own secret agenda. This agenda involves feeding information to two agents in London, who we find are Jean Grey and Logan. They're in search of a few humans, Moira and Bolivar Trask, who they find soon enough. Their mission is to deliver a courier and see what the information on the delivered courier is once it's been decrypted by the Trasks. They wonder if they're doing the right thing by working for Sinister, but not for too long. Back at Westchester, while Rogue is trying to get into the Stranger's mind, she and Magneto are exposed to fragments from the 616 X-Men reality, where Charles lives and becomes a hero, and Magneto goes down a darker path. Gambit, who's been hiding in the shadows this whole time, jumps in to save Rogue and inadvertently also breaks Magneto's contact with the Stranger. Once they're apart, Magneto asks for Nightcrawler's help in locating Mystique. Meanwhile, Gambit says he hasn't forgotten about what happened between them. As Apocalypse and Holocaust discuss Sinister's disappearance, Magneto and Rogue discuss the alternate reality that they saw. However, they're not aware that a new force that splinters stars and swallows them whole is headed toward Earth. Part 2. The Chosen. Age of Apocalypse. The Chosen. Number 1. This issue is less of a traditional continuation of the storyline, but rather more of a showcase of the X-Men roster that's going to be featured in the Age of Apocalypse saga. This showcase is done in the form of small bios of each main character of the story kept in the databanks of Apocalypse's Sanctum. It's shown to us as part of a quest by a character belonging to the order known as the Madri, the Grand Inquisitors of Apocalypse. He wishes to find out whether he's one of Apocalypse's chosen or forgotten. After shuffling through the main players of the story such as Magneto, Rogue, X-Man, Cyclops, Havoc, Sinister, Storm, Quicksilver, North Star, Aurora, the Beast, the Four Horsemen, Excalibur, the Human High Council, Weapon X, Gambit and the Externals, Colossus, Angel, Sabretooth, Bishop and Xavier, he finally finds the profile of the Madri, to his relief among the Chosen. However, Apocalypse discovers this and uses his powers to destroy the character, stating that although the Madri are chosen, he will be forgotten, reminding readers that the price of Apocalypse's displeasure is death. Part 3. From the Top. Generation Next. Number 1. This issue starts with Jonathan Starsmore, better known as Chamber, a mutant with psionic powers who we find in the Colorado Timberland, participating in an exercise with Paige Guthrie, Husk, and Mondo. Chamber and Husk are romantically linked, which bores Mondo to frustration, but they all manage to survive the first phase, after which Colossus steps in. The point of the exercise is to defeat each other, but they all work together, which pisses Colossus off, and he wants to teach Chamber a lesson since he's supposed to be the leader. However, Husk gets the drop on Colossus and uses her morphing powers to create burning acid and drop it on his metal skin. As they think they've got the upper hand, their next teacher, Shadowcat, steps in. She goes after Husk, and even with her morphing powers, Paige is no match for her. Then, another one of the students, Angelo Espinosa, Skin, comes in and stops Shadowcat long enough for Husk to find a form that Shadowcat cannot phase through. Colossus is concerned as Shadowcat disappears in a cloud of mud. Know-it-all, the system that's conducting the exercise, calls it to an end. However, Husk is still playing with Colossus, and it gets to a point where Magneto has to come in and stop them. He asks to have a word with Shadowcat and Colossus. Magneto is disappointed that the students are not fully trained yet to move and fight at a moment's notice. He explains that what Bishop claims about the alternate reality branching from Xavier's death 20 years ago, if true, could change the course of the world. Gambit and Nightcrawler have been sent to find evidence verifying Bishop's claim, and if they find it, then Magneto says that it may be up to Colossus and Shadowcat and their team to go back in time to fix things. Shadowcat mentions that to travel back in time there aren't any mutants left with chronovariant powers. Magneto retorts that it's true for now, but in the future there may be other mutants who manifest such powers. He asks Know-it-all to run a search of Apocalypse's databanks to find any such mutants, and after a bit of dangerous searching, they find one. To Colossus's astonishment, it's his sister, Ileana, who he thought was dead. However, Know-it-all informs him that she's actually still alive, living in Core, Portland. Powers have not manifested yet. And with that minute chance of hope emerging, the issue comes to a close. Part 4. Once more, with feeling. Astonishing X-Men. Number 1. This issue starts on a somber note, with Magneto telling his X-Men that many of them might not make it back alive from this raid they're about to take part in. They all stand in solidarity with Magneto, though, even if they question his believing Bishop's story about the alternate reality, Earth 616, where Xavier did not die. While they're discussing this, Blink's portal opens above them and she drops in, with a still burning Sunfire dropping in after her. The X-Men jump into action to get Sunfire to stop being on fire. Storm and Magneto try their best, but Iceman is the one who finally cools him down. However, following them through the portal, Infinite Delgado tries to get in. Blink cuts him off by closing the portal, but he at least now knows where the X-Men are hiding. The team turns their attention back to Sunfire, who explains that Apocalypse has begun his cullings of humans again through his son, Holocaust. Back in Manhattan, Rex enters the room of charred skeletons, which is Apocalypse's chamber. He tells Apocalypse that his plan to use Delgado to find the X-Men's hideout was a success. It'll only be a matter of time before they pinpoint the location. Apocalypse smile as Gambit enters the X-Mansion. Rogue and Blink are caring to Sunfire. Blink dislikes him because of their former relationship with Rogue. Gambit and Rogue stroll outdoors to converse. To Gambit's dismay, Blink brings Rogue and Magneto's son outdoors just as they're about to kiss. When Nightcrawler shows up, he informs Magneto that he thinks Bishop is an apocalyptic spy. Magneto claims he's more concerned that Bishop is a truth teller than that he's a spy. He describes to Nightcrawler what he saw on the edge of his vision the night Xavier passed away, and how that figure eventually disappeared. Eric promised Charles that evening that he would make the world a better place, even if it meant sacrificing this world. A shuttle is being prepared by Rogue and Blink in the hangar bay. Blink wonders why she won't simply teleport them to the cold area of the United States. In response, Rogue tells her that Holocaust will expect that, and that Blink is not as talented as she believes. Meanwhile, Quicksilver confronts Rogue, his stepmother, about her plans and how impractical it is that she, Blink, and Sunfire try to stop a culling by themselves. Sabretooth appears and announces that he and Wildchild will also be joining them. It seems that they still have a bone to pick with Holocaust. Magneto brings Sunfire in and lets Quicksilver know he plans to go with the team as well. Quicksilver is also instructed by him to remind the others to floss. After making a vow, Quicksilver realizes his mistake. Morph, who was disguised as Magneto, reveals himself and gives Quicksilver a big kiss. The shuttle departs after Rogue and Quicksilver bid each other farewell. Bishop asks Quicksilver, who's standing at the door, what Rogue's crew is hoping to achieve. He may not think this is the best world or even their own, but Pietro assures them that they'll fight for it nonetheless. As the issue comes to a close, Bishop murmurs to himself as Quicksilver leaves that the Professor would not want it any other way. Part 5. The Infernal Gallop, Excalibur, number 1. Part of this issue revolves around the Infernal Gallop, a trek akin to the Underground Railroad that transports mutants and humans seeking refuge from Apocalypse's rule to Avalon, a secret society nestled inside the Savage Land. As the journey is nearing its end, a large monk by the name of Kane, who's Earth's 295's Juggernaut, receives a mutant known as Switchback. He then takes her on a walking journey deep into the Antarctic that eventually leads to Avalon. Meanwhile, Nightcrawler sets out on the first leg of his trip, hoping to reach his mother. On orders from Magneto, Nightcrawler meets with Angel at the Club Heaven in Manhattan to find a way to travel to Antarctica to see his mother. Angel and Nightcrawler get into a little fight, after which Angel begrudgingly points Nightcrawler to a mutant known as Proudstar at a nearby warehouse. Magneto calls Mystique in the interim, requests that she assist Nightcrawler in getting into Avalon and locating Destiny. Mystique raises some objections but eventually relents. Upon returning to the city, Nightcrawler encounters Proudstar, who's not too fond of the method Mystique uses to extort money from the refugees he sends his way. Upon Proudstar's accusation that Mystique plunders the individuals she transports to Avalon before their delivery, Nightcrawler snatches his finger and teleports it away from his grasp. As this is happening, a young lady is seen in the background slinking away to the Citadel of Apocalypse, using a psychic arrow to fry the brain of a guard in order to get in. This lady is revealed to be Danielle Moonstar, an agent of Apocalypse, who informs him through one of his lackeys named Deadman Wade about Nightcrawler's trek to Avalon. Apocalypse isn't too happy with her killing his guards, but asks Damask to prepare her Pale Riders and find the Avalon and destroy it, along with the other refugees. Nightcrawler travels in the claustrophobic submarine Excalibur to Avalon, where we see Switchback has finally arrived and is being brought by Kane to meet Destiny. The issue comes to a close as Destiny feels a sharp premonition of Avalon burning and Apocalypse approaching as she makes physical contact with Switchback. Part 6. Some of Us Looking to the Stars, Gambit and the Externals, number 1. The issue starts with Jubilee on the run, having stolen some medical supplies, now pursued by the Infinites, the watchdogs of Apocalypse. She questions whether she's on the right side of this conflict. While some mutants opt to follow Apocalypse and survive as the Chosen, others, like herself, are drawn into resistance movements like those led by Gambit and his group of Externals. Finding herself backed into a corner, Jubilee is fortunately rescued by Sunspot and Guido, who make quick work of the Infinites. The group avoids Apocalypse's numerous subtle detections as they make their way to their rebel headquarters covertly. Lila Cheney, a non-mutant who serves as a liaison between mutants and humans, distributes their medical supplies after they arrive at the base. The group avoids Apocalypse's numerous subtle detections as they make their way to their rebel headquarters covertly. The Externals are informed that their leader is present below. They go down, only to find Magneto, the X-Men's leader. The group gets ready for a fight because they believe Magneto has hurt their leader. But soon enough, Gambit emerges from the shadows and explains that he's invited Magneto to come along because of a hatched plan that calls for Gambit's gang of mutants and their prowess at thieving certain items, like the largest jewel in the known universe. Meanwhile, at a Fedayeen station, the beaten Infinites report to their leader, an ambitious mutant named Julio Esteban Richter. He's displeased with their failure, to put it mildly, because it makes him look bad and unworthy of a promotion. He charges his men to work harder so as to impress the visiting Four Horsemen of Apocalypse. The story moves back to the externals. Through the former Morlock tunnels, where legend tells of a tribe of mutants that once inhabited them, the externals trail Magneto until they arrive at a high-security door. They're informed by Magneto that it's Apocalypse's science chamber and that they'll discover a significant portion of Apocalypse's technology and knowledge through it. They start talking about love on the way. When Gambit's beloved Rogue decided to wed Magneto, he decided to leave the X-Men and go his own way. After that, he found himself growing attached to Lila Cheney, the human leader. Lila doesn't particularly trust Magneto, but helps him because of her love for Gambit. She's able to pick the top-secret technology center's lock. As the group enters, they discover that Apocalypse's vast collection of data gathered from all four corners of the infinite cosmos dwarfs their meager thievery. The externals move forth despite their amazement. The ease with which they were able to obtain this information hub worries Gambit a little, but his concerns are quickly allayed when the crew comes under attack by the Madri, clones of Jamie Madrox. These followers of the Apocalypse, however, are quickly eliminated, and Sunspot locates a man who can assist the group in locking everyone else out. The man is called Peter Corbeau and serves as Apocalypse's librarian. He and Magneto inform the externals that Lila will be the one transporting them to space, where they must steal the crystal. Using a cybernetic visor, Lila is able to access her suppressed mutant powers. Corbeau helps her visualize the Shi'ar galaxy, where they need to go. As her power floods through her, Richter and the Madri arrive, and Magneto tells them to go while he fights them off. Lila opens a vortex that takes all the externals through it, but at the last possible second, Richter jumps through as well. As the team disappears, Magneto ponders on the fact that the fate of an entire universe rests with the team of thieves that he just sent into deep space. As the issue comes to a close, Peter Corbeau tells Magneto that Apocalypse will kill him after learning of this incident. However, he also says that he'll have the last laugh as he starts a countdown to crash Apocalypse's core systems. Part 7, Unforgiven Trespassers, Weapon X, Number 1. This issue focuses on Logan and Jean Grey, and starts with the two of them on a mission from the Human High Council to get to the Atlantic Sea Wall. They approach the seawall riding atop a Sentinel that's been reprogrammed by the High Council to provide temporary protection to the two mutants. They enter the facility, battling the various security measures set in place to try to get to their destination, which is the control center. In the meantime, the station's guards call in via teleportation an Alpha-class mutant of their own. Alex Summers is not too pleased about having been called in to deal with one measly Sentinel. Jean senses his presence, and Logan is more than happy to fight, but Jean urges him to get to the control center as soon as possible, while she holds back the line here. Havoc, upon learning there are two Alphas along with the Sentinel, blasts his way in and finds Jean waiting for him. While the two of them fight, Logan tears his way through the facility, cutting through guards and Infinites with relative ease, taking down a whole section of the sea wall. He goes back to Jean and gives Havoc a good beating, after which he takes Jean and makes an escape from the facility. Outside, they see not only his Sentinel, but others as well, transporting humans to Europe, to safety from Apocalypse's clutches. Jean tells Logan that it fills her with hope. One of the Sentinels also manages to teleport Havoc out of there, so there's no threat left. Back at the domain of Apocalypse, Cyclops informs the Dark Lord that Sinister has betrayed them and transported vital information to the Human High Council. He also informs Apocalypse that he'll not let Sinister escape, but Apocalypse says that he has steps in place to take care of that. While Havoc, who's been infused with a Sentinel on a molecular level, is in no condition to provide information, Apocalypse's horsemen wonder why Weapon X was involved. Back in London, Logan and Jean decide to sit in on the Human High Council session to learn what they plan to do. The humans, with Sinister's provided information, are debating a nuclear strike against the entirety of North America, which Logan finds objectionable. He's not the only one, as the meeting is interrupted by Magma, a mutant agent of Apocalypse. Although she's stopped by Logan, it further solidifies the humans' resolve and their plan to destroy North America. Jean and Logan watch with concern as the issue comes to a close. Part 8, The Crossing Guards, Amazing X-Men Number 1. The issue begins with a prologue explaining that more than 20 years ago, Apocalypse conquered America. However, a few lucky humans managed to escape to Europe and Asia, while the rest were sent to work camps and breeding pens. One such location is Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, where a cloaked woman informs a family of humans of a scheduled rescue operation. The woman turns to depart and disappears into the darkness. She takes off her hood, revealing herself to be the mutant Vanessa Carlyle, aka Copycat. She meets with the Marjorie and confirms that the Brotherhood's suspicions that humans are trying to flee are accurate. Meanwhile, Bishop is unable to shake the sensation that something is off at the ruins of the Xavier Mansion in New York. Dazzler is timing an X-team that includes Banshee, Quicksilver, Storm, Exodus, and Iceman as they engage a Sentinel in a combat exercise. In preparation for their impending mission to manipulate a Sentinel's programming to aid in the human evacuation, the X-Men are preparing. Some of the X-Men question the mission's wisdom until Magneto arrives to provide an authoritative voice. Bishop rambles on about how everything is bad. Iceman snaps at him, but Magneto begs him to stop. Bishop is not responsible for his state. The X-Men prepare to leave and discuss how they'll travel to Maine. Magneto claims Exodus will transport them. Exodus is skeptical about his abilities, but Magneto persuades him to believe in himself. As the X-Men teleport away, Magneto informs Bishop that before he used to try to keep Exodus from discovering the full scope of his abilities, but now he has no option. The X-Men wait in Maine as Storm destroys the defense monitoring tower off the coast of Newfoundland. She succeeds, and we witness an army of Sentinels fly by. Meanwhile, the boy from the household we visited earlier hears something and rushes to investigate. He gets abducted by what appear to be black tentacles. The Sentinels arrive and detect mutants in the vicinity. Dazzler distracts them with pictures of Logan and Jean Grey, and the X-Men complete their objective to reprogram the huge machines. At least until the Sentinels scan more mutants and eliminate Iceman. The X-Men are perplexed until the Brotherhood arrives and the issue ends on that cliffhanger. Part 9. Sinister Neglect. Factor X. Number 1. This issue features Cyclops and others of Apocalypse's prelates. In the shadow of Apocalypse's Manhattan Citadel, Sinister's elite guard, consisting of Cyclops, Northstar, and Aurora, the Bedlam brothers, and more, are hunting down a group of escaped prisoners that includes Artemis and others who are roughly analogous to various members of the Brotherhood of Evil mutants, including Avalanche, Pyro, whose skin burns whenever he uses his power, Toad, Newt, and Fantasia. In the ensuing chase, Alex ends up killing Artemis. This disturbs Cyclops, who said he had things under control. Havoc believes Cyclops has gone soft. Meanwhile, Sinister prepares and plots to disappear in order to enact his plan to oppose Apocalypse. Because Apocalypse is goading the human High Council into war threatens the work Sinister has done to evolve mutant kind in the direction he wants. Cyclops returns the recaptured prisoners to the pens, while Havoc meets with Beast, sussing out his loyalties as he plots against his brother. Cyclops then tries to meet with Sinister, encountering the Bedlam brothers and turning down an invite to join them at Heaven along the way, but he's stunned to learn Sinister has disappeared. That night, Havoc joins the Bedlam brothers at Angel's nightclub called Heaven. There, while they're trying to have a good time, the club is breached by a human terrorist group who come in with explosives strapped to their bodies and hold the club hostage. The Bedlam brothers take the terrorists down with little trouble though. The club's human singer, Scarlet, thanks them and leaves. It's then revealed that she's having a love affair with Havoc. On their way back, Havoc and the Bedlam brothers discuss the events, with the brothers playfully suggesting that Havoc is indulging in miscegenation, but Cyclops is waiting for them and stops them from fighting. Cyclops then enlists Havoc and the Bedlam brothers' aid in breaking into Sinister's lab, which they're shocked to find destroyed. With Sinister clearly gone for good, the Bedlam brothers suggest Cyclops is now in charge, though Havoc has plans of his own in that regard. As the issue comes to a close, however, we see Apocalypse awaiting an explosion that's going to supposedly create a situation where brother will be against brother. Part 10. Breaking Away. X-Man number 1. This issue, a sequel to X-Man number 1, starts with Scott Summers looking over a young Nate Gray, cribbing the famous line from Terminator. Nate is stunned and confused, so he runs, escaping from his imprisonment with some help from Cyclops, and ending up at an abandoned mansion. There, he sees Magneto arguing with Bishop about whether the team should know about the truth. As this is happening, Forge appears and tells them that he's in a dream state because of his psionic powers, and Nate wakes up to find that, while dreaming, he destroyed much of the landscape around him. Forge is with his band of rogues consisting of Toad, Sauron, Mastermind, who is Mute, and Brute. They're posing as an acting troupe trying to put on a show, specifically A Midsummer Night's Dream, while on the side working to destroy Apocalypse's minor goods as a form of small anonymous opposition to the Dark Lord. However, they're harassed by the local prelates, and Nate uses his telepathic powers to alter their minds, much to Forge's dismay, as he worries that Nate using his powers in the open will attract unwanted attention. While this is happening, the Shadow King detects Nate's presence, and another scene of Scott informing Apocalypse of Sinister's betrayal is played out yet again. Apocalypse, however, has a contingency in place, part of which involves enlisting the services of Domino and her team of hunters to approach young Nate and either recruit him or kill him. Meanwhile, in Kansas, a young woman named Teresa, who resists the human relocation by Apocalypse's forces, is in trouble. However, she's rescued from Apocalypse's forces by Forge's band. In the ensuing fight, when Nate is threatened, Teresa manifests an unknown sonic power to save him. Nate insists on bringing her along as the troop moves on, and Forge reluctantly agrees. Later, the band comes across a fellow traveler named Essex, who says he may be of some help to them. The issue closes on an ominous note, teasing the real identity of the man introduced as Essex. Part 11. Sacrificial Lambs. Amazing X-Men. Number 2. This issue opens on a particularly dark note, with the Horseman Abyss toying with a kidnapped human child before supposedly ending his life. This is happening in tandem with the nearby fight set up in the last issue between the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Chaos. The Brotherhood's goal is to sabotage the human evacuation being carried out by the Human High Council using their Sentinel army, while the X-Men try to hold the line as the main defense. The humans are being led by a Cardinal Madri, who's planted Copycat and Yeti among the crowd of humans. Blending in, Quicksilver goes after them and grabs one of them. It appears to be Quicksilver's sister Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, who was thought to be dead more than 6 years ago at the hands of one of Apocalypse's lackeys. Quicksilver almost gets lulled into a sense of stagnation before Wanda turns out to be Copycat, and the battle resumes. During the course of the battle, Banshee, who was pulled out of retirement, is chasing the Madri, and instead stumbles onto Abyss's ship. He finds the Madri dead and learns that Abyss killed him because he failed. He also learns that Abyss has enveloped the kidnapped kid in his coils and tells Banshee to return with Quicksilver, as that's who he really wants. The X-Men have defeated the Brotherhood for the time being, and Banshee finds Quicksilver and relays the information. Quicksilver and Storm leave to confront Abyss while Banshee uses harmonics to back up the work Storm did to reprogram the Sentinels. Together, Quicksilver and Storm rescue the boy. Quicksilver defeats Abyss by drawing his head into his own dimensional void so that it sucks him into himself until he's gone from existence. They return the child to his parents and learn that the rest of the X-Men managed to get the Sentinels back on track so that they can start evacuating humans again to safer continents like Europe and Asia. Meanwhile, in New York, Rex and Sebastian Shaw interrogate Karma for information regarding the defenses around Xavier's mansion, because Shaw had seen Karma talking to Gambit and Angel about the very same. Karma eventually gives up the information as the issue comes to a close, leading to Apocalypse declaring that at last he will confront Magneto, and they shall see which of them is truly fit enough to survive. Part 12. Abandoned Children. Factor X number 2. The issue begins in Apocalypse's prison, his genetic holding pens, where Magneto appears clandestinely to arrange the escape of 2 prisoners. A third, who is also there, Polaris, begs Magneto to take her with him as well. Magneto says he'd like to take everyone if he could. The risk of discovery would be too great. Polaris is distraught as Magneto leaves because she believes him to be her father. Later, at Apocalypse's citadel in Manhattan, the Summers brothers inform Apocalypse yet again of Sinister's disappearance, which leads to Apocalypse throwing a fit of rage. However, Scott doesn't flinch, which impresses the Dark Lord. The brothers leave and head toward the prison to secure the pens, while keeping up their usual bickering. Alex is still hatching his resentful plan of usurping his brother's power. Alex proceeds to meet with the Guthries, and they produce Polaris for him to interrogate. Polaris remains adamant that Magneto is her father, but otherwise provides no useful information, which angers Alex enough that he ends up knocking her out. Afterward, the trio take Polaris to the Beast's lab and order him to scrape her brain for useful information. Beast confirms that she's not Magneto's daughter. It was shown that her real parents were part of the first Midwestern Cullings. She was spared because her abilities manifested, and later a fight with Rogue left her with memory loss. Meanwhile, Cyclops meets with the Bedlam brothers and they're able to investigate and confirm that Sinister had a secret lab inside Apocalypse's statue. While there, Angel meets with Cyclops, telling him he's heard rumors of a full-scale war with the humans in Europe, which would be bad for business. While this is happening, Alex has a post-coital drink with Scarlet at Club Heaven in Manhattan. They discuss his plan of taking Scott out of the way so Apocalypse can pay more attention to him. It's also revealed that Scarlet is secretly working for the Human High Council, even as she finds herself falling in love with Alex. At the pens, Cyclops angrily halts Beast's experimentation on Polaris, telling him he's jeopardizing the efforts at peace with the Human High Council. That night, a mysterious hooded figure comes for Polaris and sneaks her out of the pens. She still believes it to be Magneto, even though we're given a slight inkling as to who it might be. On their way out, they encounter Northstar and Aurora, who were reassigned to be in their way by Alex. However, Polaris's mysterious rescuer fights them off without much hassle. However, unbeknownst to them, Alex is following. Toward the end of the issue, when Polaris is safely delivered to a member of the Underground called Lorna, Alex still watches as the hooded figure reveals himself to be Cyclops. Alex is delighted as everything seems to be falling in place for him. Part 13. Fire in the Sky, Weapon X, Number 2. This issue begins with an impressive splash panel showing the Sentinel successfully landing on the west coast of England with evacuated humans from North America. Amidst this event, dubbed the Great Sentinel Airlift, Logan is shouting and scrambling in search of Jean, who's helping with the evacuation efforts. During the immigration and clearance process, 3 people raise suspicion. These are the same 3 who blended into the human crowd toward the end of Amazing X-Men number 2. One of them, Pierce, recognizes Weapon X, and the other 2, Copycat and Box, jump into action to attack the refugees. The attack triggers memories of Jean's time in the pens, which in turn triggers a berserker rage in Weapon X, allowing him to easily overpower the evil mutants. This attack further galvanizes Logan's support for the upcoming nuclear strike on North America, but Jean remains opposed. Later, Logan goes to the High Council's aerial hideout to talk to Lady Mariko about how she feels regarding the bombing of North America. She sees no other way, but does raise concerns about Braddock's trustworthiness. Interrupting this, Pierce and his pretty boys then launch an attack on one of the Council's airships, aiming for the nuclear missile guidance systems. Logan leaps into the resulting fireball to halt them. Pierce manages to destroy the system with a kamikaze attack. Logan, now having defeated Pierce, considers letting himself burn, but he comes out of the flames after hearing a siren call from Jean via Psylink, where she's saying goodbye. He follows her link to a small airfield, arriving just as she's about to take off. Logan tells her he can't let her warn anyone about the planned nuclear attack, but when she tells him he'll have to kill her to stop her, he hesitates, instead leaping off the plane and watching as she flies away. Part 14, where no external has gone before. Gambit and the Externals, Number 2. This issue picks up right where the last one left off, as we see the team of Externals arriving on the Shi'ar homeworld. The Shi'ar Imperial Guard confronts them instantly. Guido grabs Lila as she descends from the heavens, dropping Jubilee in the process. Richter immediately surrenders, but Gambit and his team flee, prompting the Imperial Guard to follow them. After a brief battle, they flee to the forest. However, as soon as they enter the forest, the trees begin to attack and suck them into the ground. Moments later, the guard arrives with Richter in tow, only to discover that they've disappeared completely. Underground, the Externals converse with the shadowy creature that abducted the sentient plants, and Lila claims she felt the entire world summon her via the portal. Richter informs the Imperials that he has a tracker on one of the other mutants. While Oracle attempts to read his mind, she receives input stating that for a brief moment, nothing existed. She claims that the psychic spies were correct, and Emperor Decan's interference with the M'Kraan crystal will destroy all. Richter offers to assist if he may get the Externals when they're completed. Everyone in the Deep Cavern feels the Nexus's expanding effect. The commander, Jonah, tells the account of how Decan ascended to power by slaying his father and Lilandra, and the seizure of the kingdom from Deathbird. After ascending to the throne, Decan discovered the M'Kraan crystal, which was now emitting energies endangering the entire cosmos. He informs them that the blink they felt indicates that this space sector is the next to be negated. Even when Jonah assures them that they would be spared to see the end of all that is, so they can prevent it from occurring again, Jubilee panics, claiming that they were just supposed to steal a rock, which Sunspot agrees with. Just as Jonah is rallying them, Rick and Imperial Guard burst through the ceiling. As the parties combat, another blink occurs, and everything crystallizes around them. The Externals are whisked away by the Starjammers right before the crystallization wave approaches to hit them. Their captain, Deathbird, reiterates that the M'Kraan crystal is more than just a jewel, and that it wants them to see the planet's annihilation. As the issue comes to a close, we see Gambit proclaim that if they have to save the universe, they will. X-Men, The Complete Age of Apocalypse Epic, TPB, Number 3. Part 15, Burn, Excalibur, Number 2. This issue picks up right where the first one ended, as Destiny collapses from the shock of her vision. Switchback, Kane and Destiny's adopted son, Doug Ramsey, all rush to her side as she's screaming about Avalon on fire. We then move to Manhattan, where Apocalypse's Infinities attack Proudstar's Ghost Dance by the East River, but are quickly defeated despite their best efforts. Meanwhile, in the submarine bound for Avalon, the air conditioning unit has failed, leaving Nightcrawler and the other passengers choking on their own exhalations. The captain emerges rather than letting everyone perish, but cautions that the instrumentation is faulty and they may not be beyond American detection range. When they break the surface, the crew finds that the cargo bay doors are electronically sealed. Everyone may have already died from suffocation. They signal a nearby ship with a torch to cut through the doors and rescue at least some of the people inside. Callisto, the captain of the new ship, agrees to help the submarine complete its journey to Avalon. Nightcrawler is on the sub's roof, having teleported out just barely when the ship lost air. Damask is watching these events unfold from the Pale Rider ship as Moonstar repeatedly cuts Wade and watches his healing factor function. Damask receives a signal from Apocalypse warning her that he's sending a secondary expedition and that when they arrive in Avalon, she must kill Avalon. In a fit of rage, She murders Moonstar and tells Wade, and I loved it. Back aboard the ship, Callisto has grabbed hold of the refugees to Avalon, and they're on their way. She and her crew collect all of the evacuees' possessions, and when they reach deeper water, she orders the cargo doors to be lowered, dropping every passenger into the very cold ocean and killing them. The victims pile up as the boat wanders through what is known as an atrocity zone, a series of little islands in the Atlantic where Apocalypse dropped all of the corpses he was generating. Callisto shoots the crewman who allowed them to drift into it and instructs the rest of the crew to wait for her signal. Unbeknownst to Callisto, however, Nightcrawler has been teleporting throughout the ship, eliminating her crew one by one, before appearing on the deck and eliminating the rest of the crew. Callisto is ready to shoot Nightcrawler when Mystique appears, and as this issue comes to an exciting close, she aims a gun at her head. Part 16, No Exit, Astonishing X-Men number 2. This issue starts in Chicago, where notably Rogue is standing in the middle of a mob of frightened humans. The people are panicking due to the probes that Holocaust has sent. Sunfire grows enraged and powers up, the recollection of all the atrocities he watched overwhelming him, terrifying the crowd even more. He flies up to assault the probes, and Rogue pursues him. She makes touch with him and takes part of his powers and memories to help him relax, leaving Morph wondering what this would do to her psyche. We see a flashback of Sunfire being tortured by Nemesis and Apocalypse. They both fall, but Morph catches them before they reach the ground. The X-Men return to their mission to evacuate the humans. Meanwhile, Magneto is enjoying some alone time with his son Charles at the Xavier house. While he's holding his sleeping son, Bishop enters and begins berating him for his less than aggressive plan of sitting home while the X-Men risk their lives. But he stops when he notices Magneto is with Charles. He apologizes, but Magneto responds that he should be the one apologizing to his son. If Bishop is correct about their universe, Charles will cease to exist. Bishop tries to convince him that their universe was created by a cosmic accident, but Magneto insists that love is never an accident. He warns Bishop that the world could end tomorrow, so allow him tonight to say farewell to his son. Meanwhile, Apocalypse is furious that Abyss failed to halt the X-Men in Maine, as we learn in Amazing X-Men. Rex informs him that they've discovered the site of the X-Men's secret base, the former home of Charles Xavier. Apocalypse gloats, telling Rex that he'll handle this personally. Back in Chicago, Blink reluctantly prepares to send Sabretooth and Wildchild to fight Holocaust. We learn that Sabretooth rescued Blink from the Abyss many years ago, and so she has a connection with him. Understandably, due to this, she's scared that he won't return. Rogue flies in and interrupts, asking them to return and aid with the evacuation. Blink, however, defies Rogue's order and briefly displaces her before sending Sabretooth to Indianapolis. Sabretooth stirs up Wildchild and they face Holocaust. Sabretooth and Holocaust argue about their shared past when Sabretooth worked for Holocaust. Then, quite simply, Holocaust does one of the stupidest things a villain can do. Because Sabretooth is going to die anyway, he reveals the location of his hidden infinite processing plant. Sabretooth then sends Wildchild to inform Rogue of the same, while he and Holocaust fight. During the battle, Holocaust expresses his enjoyment over killing Magneto's daughter. Creed successfully removes Holocaust's containment helmet before collapsing. However, it doesn't seem to kill him, and instead, the issue concludes with Holocaust standing over Sabretooth's fallen body. Part 17. Hither Comes the Sugar Man, Generation Next, number 2. This issue begins with a child called Ileana and her friend Ace, who are underground at a location called the Core, trying to avoid someone called the Sugar Man. Outside, 2 human guards are having a conversation when they encounter a van. It contains Skin and Chamber of the Generation Next team, who capture the pair of human guards in order to steal their uniforms. Meanwhile, Colossus and Shadowcat prepare to sneak into the Core through a back door. Shadowcat goes in first and almost gets caught, but Colossus drops in at the last minute and takes out the guards, saving her in the process. The story then moves to a location called the Spa, downtown, where Quietus is being cared for by Husk. After being invited back to Quietus's place, Husk prepares them both a drink. Quietus begins to hit on her. However, Quietus has a device that can detect mutants and discovers that Husk is not who she appears to be. But it's too late, as Vincente, having turned into liquid and been drunk by Quietus, returns to solid form and Quietus explodes. Husk and Vincente search through his files for intel on Ileana. Their goal then becomes to impersonate Quietus, who is one of the Plant 4 men at the Core, which they do by having Husk transform into his massive head and Vincente fill out the rest of his bulky form. As dawn comes, the pair enter the Core, flanked by a camouflaged Mondo clearing their way. They find the disguised Skin and Chamber who have entered the plant as workers and demand them to be assigned to Quietus's detail. As their plan slowly falls into place, inside the Core, Ileana is forced to wake up for another day of back-breaking labor as this chapter comes to a close. Part 18. Choosing Sides. X-Men number 2. X-Men number 2 starts by taking readers right into the middle of the action. Domino, Grizzly, and Caliban have a one-sided battle with Rossovich, who's beaten into submission and then interrogated for information about the telepath that Apocalypse had tasked Domino with finding and recruiting. Or killing. They've been out in the field for a week now, and their frustrations are starting to show. Meanwhile, Forge trains Nate in hand-to-hand combat, intending to teach him the value of not relying on his abilities, but Forge is concerned that all he's doing is pushing Nate into Essex's arms. Nate is still young and desperate to prove himself, but is also looking for a father figure. To make matters more complicated, Essex, who's more amenable to Nate exploring his powers, helps the young mutant turn his power on himself in order to fly. After the training session, Essex tries to persuade the group to make a neighboring bioengineering plant their next target, and Forge reluctantly agrees to survey the location. However, when Nate discovers the atrocities being committed there, he leaps into action, attracting the attention of the Marjorie and overexerting his talents, forcing the group to flee. Later that evening, Nate astral projects himself and Teresa back to the mysterious mansion he previously visited, where he briefly meets Magneto and discovers it's the home of the X-Men. Returning to their bodies, Nate questions why Forge was so adamant about keeping him away from the Resistance's most powerful weapon. Meanwhile, Brute approaches Essex, having discovered his true identity. However, Essex says he's not yet ready to reveal himself to the others, and so he murders Brute in cold blood. Shortly after, Forge also confronts Essex, but they're interrupted by the arrival of Domino and her bounty hunters, which creates further complications as the issue comes to an end. Part 19. In Excess. Astonishing X-Men number 3. Since the last issue ended with a fallen Sabretooth, this issue of Astonishing X-Men understandably begins with Wildchild fleeing the Infinities. However, his fleeing is futile, as he only ends up encountering Holocaust. Holocaust scoops up Wildchild and then, fortunately, reveals himself to be Morph, just seconds before Sunfire fries the Infinites chasing them. Rogue and Blink arrive through a portal, and Wildchild, who can't talk, licks Rogue to give her his memories of what happened, as well as some of his powers. Meanwhile, the actual Holocaust is dragging a battered Sabretooth off a cliff overlooking a new Infinities processing complex. He brags about Apocalypse's new army before knocking Sabretooth out again. While unconscious, Sabretooth dreams about the night he and Logan, Weapon X, were on a mission and spared a young Blink from death. As Sunfire flies the rest of the crew to Creed's location, Morph continues to crack jokes and sing over Sunfire's protests. Back at the mansion, Bishop and Magneto have a tense conversation when Nanny comes in with Charles. The robot caregiver then detects a severe threat and wraps itself around the baby before disappearing into the floor. Magneto explains that this is her programming at work to protect Charles, and she's gone into the tunnels beneath the school. He also explains that this can mean only one thing: Apocalypse is coming. We move back to the Infinities plant, where Holocaust is watching as thousands of Infinite troops are pushed out of the factory. However, he also notices a big humpback whale marooned on the plant floor. The whale eventually reveals itself to be Morph, and the entire team hides within his jaws. They vanquish the Infinities and search for Sabretooth. Blink yells out and teleports to him when she notices him tied to a pole and bleeding. The issue ends with a tag saying, "To be concluded." Part 20. Open Wounds. Factor X number 3. This issue begins with the introduction of the Kennel, a subsection of the larger breeding pens for mutants with animalistic mutations. Here, the Infinities are having a hard time keeping a large grizzly bear-looking mutant under control. Alex Summers comes to the scene and tries to subdue the threat, although his internal monologue is still plotting against his brother Scott. This makes him distracted enough that the bear mutant is able to get the jump on Alex and injure him. Luckily, Scott is there to intervene and ends up killing the mutant. Alex, again being overshadowed by Scott, is angry at him and walks away. Later, we see Jean Grey sneak inside the pens by herself, hoping to find Sinister. However, she finds a lot of suffering creatures and then sees Sinister's lab destroyed, after which she gets caught and knocked out by a gleeful Havoc. Meanwhile, at Angel's Heaven nightclub, the Bedlam brothers arrest Scarlet for espionage, warning Angel that between her arrest and Karma's, his much-professed neutrality may soon come under scrutiny. Back at the pens, Havoc shows Scott the captured Jean Grey. He admits that he knows Scott let Lorna Dane escape, and when Scott claims innocence, Havoc urges him to prove it by executing Jean. When Scott refuses, the Guthries, who were waiting, assault and knock him out. Havoc declares himself commander of the EMF and hands over Scott to Beast, along with Jean. Now stuck in Beast's lab, both Scott and Jean are restrained, waiting to be experimented on. However, Jean is able to utilize her telekinetic abilities to remove Scott's visor, allowing him to blast Beast and liberate. Scott offers to assist Jean in liberating the pens before the Human High Council's nuclear strike completely destroys the city. Unbeknownst to them, however, Apocalypse also declares that the pens will be closed, but only so that the captives may be culled, ensuring that the strong will live while the weak will perish. Part 21. Parents of the Atom. Amazing X-Men. Number 3. The issue starts with Magneto visiting Xavier's grave, talking about the start of the end game. He and Bishop are on the X-Mansion grounds, anticipating the arrival of Apocalypse's army. Suddenly, Vanisher teleports a squad of Infinites onto the grounds before teleporting away to find Nanny and Charles. Magneto calls him a coward and, in his anger, quickly demolishes the Infinites. Just as they think this is too easy, Apocalypse drops in and gets the jump on them. Magneto says he's ready to blow them all up if it means ending this conflict, but Apocalypse tells him that Vanisher is currently on his way to bringing Charles back here, which means the explosion would kill him too. Naturally, Magneto relents. Vanisher finds Nanny in the mansion's tunnels, but she's prepared. Later, Quicksilver's X-Men squad returns to discover Magneto and Bishop gone, along with a dead Vanisher in the tunnels. Quicksilver assigns Exodus and Dazzler to find Nanny and Charles, and Iceman alerts Rogue to Magneto's capture before rushing off to find out where his father and Bishop are being held. He then goes to Manhattan and confronts a joyless Angel, who informs him that Magneto is being kept at Apocalypse's citadel, while Bishop is with the Marjorie in Quebec, forcing him to choose between his father and his father's goal. In Quebec, the Shadow King interrogates Bishop and discovers Magneto's plot to recreate reality, while Quicksilver returns to the mansion. With a stone in his heart, he informs Storm and Banshee that he intends to rescue Bishop, and as the chapter comes to an end, they set out to save a man they hardly know and salvage a plot they barely understand. Part 22. Body Heat. Excalibur number 3. This issue starts on a serious note as Callisto has died, and Mystique and Nightcrawler, mother and son, are holding a family reunion. They climb the ladder to Mystique's helicopter, and when Nightcrawler asks how she discovered him, she explains that she was looking for the pirates after they killed the previous 2 groups of visitors. Wade is still distraught by Moonstar's death on the Pale Rider's ship, and Damask informs him Moonstar never liked him in the first place. Nightcrawler and Mystique arrive to Mystique's Antarctic headquarters, and Kurt questions his mother's refusal to visit Avalon. When she avoids the subject, he hits her and accuses her of all he'd learned about her during the ghost dance. Later, while rowing down the underground river to Avalon, they meet Kane. Mystique inquires as to Destiny's whereabouts. When he's informed that she's too elderly to meet visitors, he obliges. The 3 of them go to Avalon, with Kane carrying all of the containers they packed, and when they arrive at the edge of the paradise, Mystique, who's never seen the end of the voyage, is overcome with emotion by the beauty of Avalon and the news that Destiny has a son. As they approach Destiny, Irene is overjoyed to see Raven and hopes that this means she'll stay with them. When Mystique says she came to take her back, Destiny turns silently and brings them to Avalon Village. She introduces them to Switchback and tells of her vision that they'll all die. Meanwhile, at the entrance to Avalon, Wade is ready to destroy everything as ordered, while Damask is taken away by the beauty she sees and is second-guessing her orders. In Avalon Village, Mystique and Nightcrawler inform Destiny about Bishop, Xavier, and the alternate history. Destiny is hesitant to leave, arguing that her departure could destroy Avalon and stating that she has a lot to lose, including her son. Suddenly, a rocket rips up their tent, and everyone scrambles to find out what happened. Nightcrawler tries to encourage Kane to fight to protect them, but he experiences a major crisis of consciousness as his aggressive nature fights his passionate pacifist nature. The crisis is so extreme that it causes an aneurysm, killing him. Mystique and her companions then draw their weapons, while Wade continues to fire at them from atop a hill. He asks Damask why she isn't killing anyone, and she switches sides, stabbing Wade. This gives Nightcrawler just enough time to teleport his head away from his body. As the issue comes to its penultimate close, Damask assures him that if he wants her support, she's willing, and that she, Mystique, and Switchback are ready for Apocalypse's arriving assault. Part 23. The Common Right of Toads and Men. Weapon X. Number 3. This issue starts in a snowy mountain location, where some people spot and recognize Weapon X. Turns out he's on an expedition to Wundagore Mountain, former Magneto sanctuary. On the way, the people he runs into are 2 techno-organic Reavers, Deadeye and Mangle. Naturally, a fight ensues, and Logan is able to defeat them before continuing on his journey. He visits Wanda's grave, where he meets up with Carol Danvers, an old friend. She asks where Jean is, and Logan implies that he needs to find her. He asks after G-Dub, and she agrees to take him to the mutant referred to as Gateway, a hermit mutant with teleportation powers. Meanwhile, in London, the Human High Council debates their next move to thwart Apocalypse, which has been on a killing spree as of late. They discuss that Logan needs to be successful on his current mission, otherwise they'll be left with no option other than a preemptive nuclear strike on North America. Back at Wundagore, Carol brings Weapon X to Gateway, and he urges the Aboriginal mutant to help lead the High Council's armada against Apocalypse. Because the control system for the Human High Council's armada was damaged, as shown in the last issue, Logan needs Gateway to serve as the navigator for the fleet so it can continue on its mission. expedition. Gateway refuses because he doesn't want any part in the human or mutant world or their politics anymore. Instead, he's determined to record as much of human history as he can before the world ends. However, they're soon ambushed by Reavers, including Pierce and Vultura, as they attack from the sky. Gateway teleports himself, Weapon X, and Carol onto Pierce's airplane, and Carol sacrifices herself to push Pierce out of the plane, then detonate a cluster of grenades as the pair fall through the air. As Logan mourns his friend in the final page of the issue, Gateway agrees to at least go to Paris and allow the Human High Council to attempt to persuade him to help. Part 24. To the Limits of Infinity. Gambit and the Externals, number 3. The issue begins with Starjammer's ship exiting hyperspace, just outside the energy absorption device that surrounds the M-Crown planet. When Gambit reconsiders his idea, Deathbird reminds him that he'd come across the cosmos for it. The Starjammers want to keep the Armada busy while the Externals teleport planetside. When they reach the surface, they're immediately ambushed by Shi'ar guards, and Bobby tells them that they don't need to defeat the army. They just need to stall them while Gambit and Lila retrieve the jewel. As Lila, Gambit, and Deathbird get closer to the crystal, which Gambit didn't realize was 3 stories high, Deathbird informs them that a fragment of the crystal has just as much power as the entire thing. As more troops approach, Lila is grabbed by a weird hand and dragged into the crystal. Gambit and Deathbird follow her until they find Jaff, the M-Crown's protector. Outside, Guido, Sunspot, and Jubilee continue to fight, and after a blink, Sunspot's hands turn white with energy. Suddenly, Gladiator flies in with Richter. With soldiers still surrounding them, the situation appears increasingly desperate. Meanwhile, Gambit, Deathbird, and Jaff approach the crystal's center, where Lila and Deken are fascinated by a bright energy ball. When Deathbird tries to attack Jaff, she becomes mesmerized as well. Jaff explains to Gambit how the crystal connects all realms, including referencing the X-Men who passed through there in the 1970s. He informs Remy that Bishop is telling the truth about the world being wrong and how it affects all realities. Jaff instructs him to grab a shard of the crystal and use it to transport Bishop to the past and repair everything. Back outside, while Gladiator and Sunspot fight, another blink occurs. But this time Sunspot's entire body shines bright white, and everyone except Richter and the Externals is transformed into crystal. Everyone jumps into the crystal as Gambit prepares to destroy the energy matrix. As he strikes the blazing ball, everything erupts, and Sunspot absorbs more energy than ever before. As a result, the issue closes with him being left behind as Lila teleports the team home. Part 25. Last Stand, X-Universe, number 1. A little departure from the storyline we've been following so far, but set in the same universe. This issue begins with the familiar face of Gwen Stacy, who's dead in the 616 Marvel timeline, but clearly alive in the altered reality of Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse. Engaged in this reality as a humanitarian worker in Wakanda, she strives to help people in need, but recognizes that she cannot save everyone. Imagine if you took everything cool and revolutionary about Black Panther, but reversed it. We learn that in Wakanda, since the death of T'Challa, their warrior king, the once great nation has been struck by famine and has become truly vulnerable to attack by outside forces. The city is attacked by marauders, and they kill a handful of its residents. Gwen immediately kills one of them while defending the Wakandans, and Tony Stark arrives just in time with relief help from Europe to destroy the remaining 3 terrorists. He's traveling on a large metal spider ship piloted by Clint Barton. The ship docks, and Tony goes out in search of the only other aid worker in Wakanda except for Gwen, Donald Blake, whom he discovers barely seconds after getting off. Tony and Donald exchange pleasantries, and Tony informs Donald that the Human High Council has requested his assistance. Therefore, he must accompany him back to London. Back in London, Ben Grimm and Susan Storm fly their plane through the mutant fleet that's hovering above the city. The Armada has departed from America. Its commander, Mikhail Rasputin, the Fourth Horseman, has arrived and will initiate Apocalypse's peace talks with Eurasian leaders. Matthew Murdoch, the Keeper, gives Mikhail a report on the Eurasian army's increasing nuclear might while they're on board. Ben and Susan start to arrive at the command center Hangar Bay in London as Mikhail prepares for his address. They hear a radio request to abandon their landing, which they do, fortunately sparing them from the base explosion that kills everyone else in the vicinity. It doesn't take long for Ben and Susan to locate the saboteur once the monster locates them when they land. The monster responds to Ben's description of him as a thing made of mutants by saying that he's a man who's grown stronger than any mutant could ever hope to be. Ben defends himself from the thing's onslaught by shooting a full magazine's worth of bullets at the monster's chest, only infuriating it further. Fortunately for Susan, the thing tosses her against the closest wall and turns away as Susan leaps in to save him by blowing off his right ear. Susan is fortunate enough to live, allowing her and Ben to carry on their hunt for survivors. They eventually locate one in Dr. Bruce Banner. Although the doctor is bleeding profusely from the right side of his skull, he tells them he only wants to be taken to the meeting with Mikhail and doesn't want any medical assistance. The chief of Eurasian Security, Victor Von Doom, welcomes Mikhail to the meeting and expresses regret that the other council members were unable to make it. As he makes his way to the front of the ship to speak with the numerous Eurasian civilians below them, Mikhail encourages Doom not to apologize. When the whole group gathers behind him to join Doom, he informs them that he's come to provide peace. After completing his speech, Mikhail assures the populace of his genuine intentions by giving Donald Blake and his friends a tour of his spacecraft. They agree, but as Mikhail shows them around his newest mutant experiment, Empath, they discover they're not welcome. We find out as the issue comes to an end that Empath is being imprisoned here, forced to use his powers in a way that allows Mikhail to influence the humans. Part 26. It Only Hurts When I Sing. Generation Next, number 3. This issue starts with Skin and Chamber preparing to fight against the mutant guards in the core, who were enslaving humans in their workyard. They plan to kill the guards, but they're unsure of how to win the fight. A patrolman arrives to investigate the disturbance, but Skin tells Chamber that they'll not be able to win the fight and that they must choose the right time to fight. The guards kill an old man and a young girl fraternizing in the workyard, and the girl erupts in rage, throwing a rock at the guard and blasting him off a cliff. Chamber watches from the window in disbelief, and Skin hurries to release Chamber. The patrolman asks if there's anything wrong, but Skin replies that they're just checking the perimeter for stray humans. In Quietus's office, Husk and Vincente are trying to find information on Ileana, but a little old woman peeks her head through the door. She leaves to check as Vincente drifts out of disguise. The secretary comes over to announce a visitor, but is dragged into the room by the Sugar Man. He hears a sound in the next room and goes to investigate, tearing down the curtain that separates the rooms. Sugar Man sees that Quietus is in the shower and tells him to hurry up. Outside the core, two figures float down out of the sky and shadow the bright morning sun. They land on a ledge above the entrance, and Shadowcat asks her husband what's going to happen next. Colossus and Shadowcat decide to wait for the signal, go inside, come out with Ileana. Meanwhile, Ileana talks to an elderly woman named May, who tells her to hush and work. Ace falls over the edge of a cliff and is caught by Mondo. Mondo expresses his sympathies towards Ace, who's shocked to see Mondo's face as a mutant. A non-suspecting guard falls to a blast of psionic energy from Chamber, and the guys discuss their victory. Quietus comes up behind them and tells them to be less conspicuous, as they're going to expose the team. Back outside, Know-It-All's face materializes on the wall, and she reports to her teachers that the team is not doing well on the inside. Shadowcat suggests that the teachers go in to lend their students a hand, but Colossus firmly says no, as the only priority is securing Ileana. Quietus holds up the unconscious bodies of Chamber and Skin to Sugar Man, who compliments him on his thoroughness and tells him to use his mutation instead. Back inside the core, Mondo places Ace on a cliff, promising her safety. Ace pleads with him to take her with him, as she'll never be safe in the core. Mondo notices Ileana and promises to return for her. Mondo absorbs Ileana into his stomach, sinking into the ground. Colossus and Shadowcat alert them that Ileana faces danger, as the longer in his stomach, the greater the risk of being fully absorbed. Colossus reminds his wife of their marriage if float down into the core. Chamber awakens in Sugarman's clutches and spits in his face, courtesy of Generation Next. Sugarman orders Quietus to execute Chamber, and a single shot is fired, ending the issue. Part 27, Turning Point, X-Man number 3. The issue picks up right where the last one ended, as Domino, the assassin of Apocalypse, orders Forge to hand over the telepath, or else. Forge assures her that there's no need for violence and that they can accommodate her in some way. Domino points out that someone's already lopped off a good chunk of him, so she would be asking herself how much longer she wants to keep that tongue. Essex, who recognizes Domino as Apocalypse's most dangerous assassin, slips away, recognizing him as the most dangerous one. He warns Nate telepathically to keep away and swears he won't let Apocalypse take away the boy. Forge finds Toad and Mastermind and asks Jason for help, then presents him to Domino. Domino, suspicious of Jason, creates a nightmare image of Apocalypse that belittles and attacks Domino. However, the assassin realizes that Jason is an illusionist and shoots him, intending to make Forge her next kill. At that moment, they're intercepted by Nate, who telekinetically propels himself toward Domino and flies away with her from Forge. Unfazed, Domino strikes Nate, causing him to crash while she somersaults safely to the ground. Nate freezes her telekinetically, realizing that Domino gets off on others' suffering and decides to give her a taste of her own medicine by making her relive the deaths of all her victims from their side. Domino screams and sinks down, catatonic. Forge is relieved and proud that Nate is starting to act like a responsible adult. He heads toward the stable, where he finds Brute dead. Essex turns up, claiming Domino murdered him. Forge is aware that Essex is the true killer and tells him to stay away from the boy or fight him to his last breath. Nate experiences Forge's life in memory flashes, and Essex reveals himself as Sinister. He explains that had he known Forge meant that much to Nate, he would have killed him sooner. As the issue comes to a close, Nate is shown hungry for answers and promises to have them. Part 28, Holocaust, Astonishing X-Men, number 4. After learning of Sabretooth's chained corpse at the conclusion of the last issue, Blink confronts Holocaust at the start of this one. Telling Blink that she's a mutant with unrealized potential, he nearly feels bad about killing her. After attacking and successfully removing some of his life support gear, he grabs her and tosses her into a wall. She's able to subdue Holocaust by teleporting behind him. She blinks him into a vat of liquid because he taunts her. The other X-Men are engaged in combat with an army of Infinites not too far away. Sunfire is instructed by Rogue to take Wildchild and set the human survivors free. Rogue and Morph are still battling with the Infinites. Apocalypse is tormenting Magneto, his captive, in his fortress in Manhattan by showing him pictures of Rogue. Apocalypse is informed by Magneto that he and the X-Men would never give up the fight. He's informed by Apocalypse that he's been waiting for 2,000 years to prevail. They're going to perish, every single one of them. Sunfire releases the humans from the Infinite prison by killing its guards back in Indianapolis. One of the prisoners informs Sunfire that they'll never be free as long as the Holocaust continues. She's informed by Sunfire that the matter is being handled. Morph bursts into the room where Blink is and inquires about Holocaust. She threw herself into a pot of genetic stew. Blink informs him. Holocaust then snatches Blink, causing Morph to fall to the ground. Holocaust's brain's electromagnetic flow is reversed by Morph. When Blink questions how he accomplished it, Morph transforms and reveals it's Rogue. She'd taken in Morph's power to change. The actual Morph makes an appearance, and with the shape of a brick, he falls squarely on Holocaust. Holocaust is then told by Rogue that it's over, but he knocks her flying with a vicious uppercut. While the other X-Men fight Holocaust, Morph rushes to check on Rogue. She's unresponsive, so Morph transforms into the only thing that will draw attention, her son, Child. Rogue returns to Holocaust and attacks him again. He taunts her by saying he'll keep an eye on her son. Furious, Rogue continues to charge him, calling him a monster. Finally, Holocaust is knocked into the teleplatform and escapes. Rogue tries to follow him but is halted by an Iceless O. Iceman informs her that Pietro didn't send him all the way to Indianapolis to watch her commit herself. Sabretooth stands behind the Iceman. Blink is ecstatic that Mr. Creed is alive. Rogue promises that the Age of Apocalypse will come to an end tonight. The story continues in X-Men Omega. X-Men, The Complete Age of Apocalypse Epic TPB, number 4, Part 29, by Generation Next, number 4. At the start of this issue, Mondo has Illyana trapped in his chest, but she's being consumed. Time is running out. Husk and Vincente, dressed as Quietus, are about to execute their teammates under Sugarman's orders. Mondo is carrying Illyana Rasputin out of the mines in the form of a guard. Mondo has concealed Illyana inside his body and is digesting her by the minute. Sugarman has caught 4 Generation Next members and ordered Quietus, Husk and Vincente in disguise to assassinate Chamber. They had no choice but to blast him in the head, but it doesn't please Sugarman. Their secret has been broken. Sugarman uses his lethal tongue to sever Husk's artificial body of Quietus. The game is over, and they all unveil themselves. Sugarman tells his underlings to assault, and just as they dive for the young mutants, Chamber explodes his chest, revealing that he utilized his psionic power to trick everyone into believing Husk killed him. Vincente is knocked unconscious during the ensuing skirmish. When Colossus arrives, he tells them all to find Illyana and take her from the core right away. Sugarman hears this and begins to delve below to see why the young X-Men chose to go on this suicidal mission. Down below, Mondo fights many guards after blowing his cover and rediscovers the little girl, Ace. Ace begs him to take her with him, and he sympathetically agrees. Sugarman's tongue pierces Mondo's tummy, causing Illyana to emerge from his chest. Sugarman has Illyana, but not for long, as Colossus falls directly on Sugarman's head. He then stamps and punches Sugarman into a pulp. The war has intensified, and all human slaves are now fighting with their oppressors. The Generation Next team's escape appears all the more difficult. The crew is assaulted from behind, but Shadowcat, who's been hidden inside Colossus's body, rushes out and deflects the enemy's strike. The crew is hit and separate. Colossus makes the executive decision that Illyana comes first. He instructs Shadowcat to take him and Illyana to the surface, leaving the squad defenseless underground. The young members of Generation Next are all but doomed, but Colossus, certain that his wife and sister are now safe, chooses to return and attempt once more to save them. He's unsuccessful, leaving the team to fend for themselves as the issue comes to an end. The plot continues in X-Men Omega, Part 30, On Fire, Excalibur, number 4. The story continues in this issue with Switchback still standing over Wade's dead body, abruptly changing positions and saying that it's her mutant power to move herself back down her timeline for a maximum of 10 seconds, in this case to relieve the headache she was experiencing. Mystique and Switchback return to the Hamlet while Nightcrawler interrogates Damask about Apocalypse's next wave. She tells him she doesn't know as she leans in and massages his facial fur, adding that it feels like velvet. Back in the village, everything is on fire, and everyone is suffering. They discover Destiny and Doug assisting others. Doug and Mystique argue about Doug's mutant condition and how his mother could be friends with someone like Mystique. Switchback interrupts and adds that all they want is for her to come to America, affirm or disprove Bishop's claims. Suddenly, one of the villagers with bioelectric abilities goes berserk, murdering numerous others. Before Mystique can kill her, Doug intervenes and informs her that he can read background noise in thoughts and that she has too. At this moment, Shadow King confesses that he's possessing the girl, saying that he came in with Wade and leaped to Switchback after his death. Mystique pushes Doug aside and blasts the possessed girl. Damask informs him that all they did was kill his host, and he'll now have a new one by now. Nightcrawler questions how his power works, and she explains that he travels from mind to mind via an opposite dimension. Destiny stumbles amid the carnage, and Shadow King approaches her in the form of a pyrotic mutant named Marcus, mocking her life's labor as a waste of time. Damask unleashes her own power, wielding burning mental knives that drive Shadow King further from the boy. The boy is released as Doug accuses Nightcrawler and Mystique of orchestrating all of the chaos, to which he responds that it was unavoidable and that all they did was bump it up the timetable. Shadow King possesses Mystique and causes her to cycle through forms until she reaches Sabretooth, which is the darkest memory he can locate in her mind. Nightcrawler teleports. Switchback uses her power to lengthen their time between realms, where they discover the Shadow King, and Damask kills his psyche with her psychic knives. With his last bit of power, he unleashes a mutant blast on Destiny, but Doug steps in and saves her, dying in the process. As the issue comes to a close, Destiny offers to follow Nightcrawler back to Magneto and help defeat Apocalypse. Part 31, The Art of War, X-Men number 4. This issue begins as Shadow King informs Apocalypse that Domino's mission to eliminate the rogue telepath has failed. This naturally displeases Apocalypse, and he pledges to complete the task himself before returning to torture the captive Magneto. Meanwhile, Nate viciously confronts Sinister, who shakes him off before explaining Nate's origin as a genetic creation of Sinister's, generated using the DNA of Cyclops and Jean Grey, because they're such powerful mutants, then artificially aged to serve as a potential weapon against Apocalypse. He was then rescued by Cyclops and smuggled out of the pens, as part of Cyclops' overall effort to balance the scales of justice, and handed over to Forge. After saying all this, he then urges Nate to fulfill his destiny and kill Apocalypse. Nate instead unleashes his full power on Sinister, warning him that he'll go after Apocalypse because it's only a matter of time until Apocalypse pursues Nate himself for being this supposed weapon. After a battle in which Nate is able to overpower his supposed creator, he flies away, and a surprised Sinister succumbs to his injuries and dies. Nate says his goodbyes to his buddies from the acting troupe small band of rebels and heads east towards where Apocalypse is. When he creates a Psylink with Magneto, he witnesses the mutant leader being tortured by Apocalypse and tracks him down to his citadel. There, he meets Cyclops and Jean as they're trying to free the prisoners from the pens. Despite feeling a connection to them and vowing to find them after his revenge, Nate marches on to the citadel, declaring that he's coming for Apocalypse. Part 32, Reckonings, Factor X, number 4. With Scott revealed as a traitor, this issue begins with Alex assuming the control and power that he's craved so much for so long. Almost immediately, his first act of business is that he gives the order to kill everyone in the pens, a directive that doesn't sit right with both Beast, who considers their deaths a waste of good genetic material, and the Bedlam brothers, who feel like the slaughter of the prisoners in cold blood is beneath their status as alpha mutants. In any case, he soon receives word that Scott is still alive, which angers him, and he sends the elite mutant force to track him down instead of culling the pens. Meanwhile, at the kennel, Scott and Jean Grey are preparing to take out the Brain Trust so as to remove its stifling effect on the prisoners. They run into the Bedlam brothers. Not feeling very good about cold-blooded murder and irritated by the Guthries, agree to help them hold off the Guthries, then cut the power. As an aside, Apocalypse's forces arrive at Angel's nightclub Heaven and charge Angel with treason, therefore seeking his arrest. Angel obviously doesn't take this sitting down, and instead attacks the Infinite before giving them the slip. Back at the pens, Jean destroys the Brain Trust, and Havoc learns that Scarlet who's being held at the pens for being in cahoots with the human resistance, is pregnant. However, when the room suddenly turns dark, he recognizes it as his brother's doing. As Scott and Jean escort the recently released captives out of their cells, the kennel's animalistic mutants assault Beast, forcing him to flee. Alex tracks down Scott eventually and assaults him, but it's again made clear that he's no match for his brother. Scott then addresses the former prisoners, telling them that they must leave the island and promising them that a better future awaits them elsewhere. When Alex finally wakes up at the end of the issue, he vows to find and kill his brother once and for all. The story concludes in X-Men Omega. 33, The Maze, Gambit and the Externals, number 4. This issue begins in the Morlock tunnels, where lovers Dazzler and Exodus discover the remains of Nanny, the mobile mechanical construct in charge of Magneto's kid, Charles. They realize that the boy is missing. Meanwhile, Apocalypse questions Richter about recent happenings in the Morlock tunnels while a young child naps in the background. Those events include Gambit and Lila running through the tunnels in an attempt to escape Richter. They're unaware that Richter has devised a strategy to track Guido and Jubilee, the remaining members of the Externals, as Sunspot died in the previous issue. He's determined to bring Gambit to Apocalypse's feet. Apocalypse wonders if Richter ever considered that he was being set up, given that Jubilee had the shard from the Crown crystal. Richter realizes that his desire to bring in Gambit could have ruined everything Apocalypse had worked for. Apocalypse begins to tell a little more of the story. Jubilee is on the run from Guido. She doesn't know what's going on, except that he no longer looks to be an external. Surprisingly, she had both the shard of the Crown crystal and Charles Lenshire, Magneto's son. Earlier, we see Jubilee reflect, which was that she and Guido deliver the shard to Magneto at his mansion in Westchester. On their route, they met the nanny, young Charles's protector. For some reason, Guido destroyed the nanny and switched on Jubilee. She'd been fleeing since. And because Guido was the only one who knew where Magneto was, she was running blind with a wailing boy. Guido triggered a flood, forcing Jubilee to stop and wait it out. By then, Guido had caught up. He took the shard and admitted that he had no choice but to betray the crew. He'd been apprehended 2 months before, and a chip was implanted in his body to assist the Infinite Guards follow his movements. Ultimately, Gambit was the one they wanted. The Infinites believed that Gambit would lead them to Rogue, who would then lead them to Magneto. Guido went with it because he figured if Gambit was gone, he'd have Lila all to himself. When he and Jubilee ran into the nanny, Guido knew it would lead them right to Magneto, so he broke it. He then took the shard and the child, leaving Jubilee. Meanwhile, Gambit doubles back after hearing Richter's remark that Guido could be traced, hoping to get to the X-Men first. Instead, Gambit and Lila encounter Guido. They realize that he has Charles. Richter then catches up, informing everyone that Guido has been on the wrong side the entire time. He then decides to do more than just imprison Gambit. He attempts to kill all 3 of them. Guido hooks a support beam, giving Gambit enough time to retrieve Lila and escape. Guido then lets the support beam collapse. Gambit hopes Guido doesn't pull the ultimate sellout and deliver the shard to Apocalypse. Back in the present, Richter informs Apocalypse that the Externals were all killed in the earthquake he caused. He knows that things didn't go exactly as planned, but the aim was still met. Apocalypse then informs Richter that he's mistaken. He hefts the infant, and Richter realizes it's the same boy Guido had been carrying. Apocalypse tells Richter that the youngster is Magneto's offspring. Guido, the man who brought the youngster, understood just what Apocalypse wanted. Richter gets reprimanded for his folly. Apocalypse then reveals that he also has a shard of the Crown crystal. Richter's service pales in comparison to Guido's, and as a result, he's slain. Dazzler and Exodus discover Gambit and Lila in the Morlock tunnel's rubble. They take them to Magneto, and the issue ends with them sharing the bad news. However, the story is not concluded, and it will be in X-Men Omega, Part 34, on Consecrated Ground, Amazing X-Men, number 4. This issue starts in Quebec, where the Marjorie priests hold a ceremony for the death of Bishop, who's been tainted by the Shadow King. The priests chant a song of cleansing, telling Bishop that his words of another reality where Apocalypse does not rule are poison. He must die so that his poisonous words do not affect anyone else. Storm, who's able to free Bishop, pulls lockpicks from her side and asks him if the Storm from his timeline ever forgot the training she was given in Cairo as an orphan. After that, she's able to pick the lock on his chains and frees Bishop. In the Sanctum in Quebec, 2 hooded figures, Quicksilver and Banshee, arrive to guard a door with Apocalypse's picture on it. They're surprised to find that the person behind the door begs them to kill him. Jamie Madrox, the true Jamie Madrox, is relieved that help has finally arrived to save him from Apocalypse. Banshee, shocked and sad for Jamie, tells Quicksilver of how he'd heard that Sinister and the Beast had mutated Jamie's body to exceed his normal duping abilities, but had never thought they would leave Jamie helpless and crippled like this. Back at the remains of the Xavier estate in Westchester County, Blink teleports her team back to the grounds of the estate. Rogue orders Sabretooth to sniff around and find out what has happened to her son and husband. Sabretooth smells the air and notices the scent of both Magneto and Apocalypse. They find the presence of Shadowcat, Colossus, and a kid. Rogue blames herself for not being with the younger students. As Sabretooth opens the hatch to the sewers, Rogue informs her that someone is heading toward them. They find Gambit, Lila Cheney, and Jubilee with them, but Exodus informs Rogue that they cannot find Charles. Rogue punches Gambit through the sewer walls and asks him where her son Charles is. Gambit lies on the ground, not moving. Back in Quebec, Storm and Bishop fight off the Marjorie but get cornered. Jamie begs the two X-Men to kill him quickly. Quicksilver wonders how they can justify killing Madrox when he's just as much a victim in all this as they are. Banshee tries to reason with Quicksilver by telling him that one life being sacrificed to kill all of Madrox's dupes might be worth it. Abyss appears and warns the two X-Men about their moral dilemma. Quicksilver, who has defeated the Madman once, tells Abyss that they're about to die. Abyss also reveals that he knows everything in the deepest, darkest part of everyone's minds, including Banshee's fear of dying and living and all else. Quicksilver begs Banshee not to sacrifice himself, as the X-Men and Quicksilver need him. Banshee orders Quicksilver to take Madrox and leave. Quicksilver is unable to save himself. He asks Jamie to not sacrifice himself like Banshee, as he can't lose another good man. As Bishop and Storm fight the dupes, the Marjorie stop, and their eyes seem lifeless. Quicksilver screams for Jamie not to die, but it's too late. Storm and Bishop appear from the building, and Quicksilver hugs her, explaining how Banshee sacrificed himself to save them all. Quicksilver and the other two walk toward the Ark to go to where the other X-Men are. They discuss how they'll make the Earth a better place and how they'll sacrifice all to ensure that Apocalypse falls. At the Xavier estate, Rogue questions why Guido took Charles away from him, while Exodus and Dazzler hold Rogue back. Nightcrawler and Destiny teleport in with Destiny, telling them to follow Magneto's plans. When the Ark reaches the land, the three mutants walk out of the ship, and as the issue comes to a close, Quicksilver tells them to retrieve the piece of the Imkran crystal and save his father and brother. Part 35. Into the Maelstrom. Weapon X, number 4. This issue starts in Eurasia. Emma and Logan are discussing the Cullings in America and Gateway's decision to lead the Armada against Apocalypse. Logan reveals that it's always been human nature to genocide and cites examples of how other humans killed others just because of where they lived. In the virtual reality video, Logan shows Gateway an Infinite killing a child named Jodie Craig, who begs for mercy. Logan pulls a diary from the ground and tells Gateway to read it before deciding whether or not he wants to help in the attack against Apocalypse. Apocalypse, who's now in New York City, talks about how, if he does not talk, he'll allow his associates to handle him from here on out. He also shows Rex that the human Armada is no longer in London and that they could be heading to attack them as they speak. Apocalypse believes Pierce is more adaptable than they'd expected and may yet win against the Council for them. In the cockpit of the lead Armada ship, Logan tells the helmsman to steer the ship to the storm front that they've picked up to use it as cover. He turns to Emma, who follows him. They wind up in the room that houses the hundreds of nuclear bombs waiting to be dropped on Apocalypse's stronghold in New York. Logan tells Emma that he knows Jean and that she has a soft heart, so he must harden his and drop the bombs on her to save the rest of the world from genocide. Pierce, carried by another enhanced human with wings, flies into the lead ship and radios the Infinites to which ship he's in. When the two enhanced humans land, Pierce orders the flyer to take out Gateway and Logan while he takes care of everyone else. Emma tries to radio Gateway, warn him, and ask for Logan's assistance on the ship. Logan and Gateway face off against a flyer, who they both recognize as Carol Danvers. Emma, who was once a friend of Logan, tells Braddock that she can't believe he sold out the human race. Braddock fires a blast at Pierce, knocking him out of the cockpit. However, Pierce stabs a hole in Braddock's chest, fatally wounding him. Emma chops Pierce's hand off and grabs Braddock in his final moments. Carol begs Logan to kill her, as she's infected with something loathsome and is making her kill Gateway. Logan, who's still shut up from Carol's shot, tells her that he can't reach her in time. Pierce's cyborg fingers reach out to kill Carol, but Logan can't reach her in time. Pierce reaches for Gateway and tells Logan that they've lost and will snap Gateway's neck first. Logan's claws pop out of his handles and he stabs Pierce through with them. Logan asks Pierce if he has any more jokes. He picks him off the ground, finally killing him. Around Logan and Gateway, the Interceptors catch up with them, and Logan thinks they may have won the battle. Gateway tells Logan to not give up, and he creates a portal for the entire Armada to enter. As the issue ends, Logan grits his teeth and says that if it's in his cards to take the bombs to Apocalypse, then let the war end, as Doomsday is coming. Part 36. Dying Breath. X-Universe number 2. The issue begins in London with Rafe and his wife, Marta, heading toward the transport ships with their child to turn the Eurasian people into metahumans to survive in the new world of Apocalypse. Meanwhile, Tony Stark is strapped to a table on Mikhail's capital ship, unaware of the Resistance's plan to test him. They rewired his mechanical heart to cause feedback in all the systems on Mikhail's ships, causing Stark to go into massive cardiac arrest. But there's another prisoner on board, Donald Blake, who uses his medical expertise to save Stark's life. life. Mikhail interrupts a meeting of the Human High Council to offer them one last chance to surrender. The team prepares for battle and decides to split up as Doom and Blake inform the Council of their success. The rest of the battle team takes control of the command of the ship and takes control of the turret and tower of the track. Tony and Gwen fight their way into the control room, but Asia reappears and tells them to stop or be destroyed. Blake arrives at the bell tower, where the council members interrupt Mikhail's speech about his demands. Mikhail is angered by the revelation that his ship was hijacked and his mission failed. He has part of his Strife Force army kill the council members. Doom, waiting outside in Mikhail's personal flagship, kills the Strife Force members before they can complete their mission. The council fights many Strife Force members, and the council is finally able to win. Doom kills the last of Mikhail's fighting forces. Blake attacks the mutant back, knocking them to their deaths underground from the clock tower. Doom seizes the opportunity to get the council members to the lead airship and safety. Susan yells at her partner to get on the ship, and Ben arrives at the last second as the ship is about to take off. Susan turns to see her partner as the ship flies away, only to find Ben dead from an earlier gunshot wound, still holding the little boy. As Susan cries, they're all engulfed in a white light as reality ceases to exist, and the issue comes to an end. Part 37. Endings. X-Men. Omega number 1. The finale showdown issue of the Age of Apocalypse begins with Holocaust and Apocalypse enjoying the torment of their prisoner Magneto, and they learn that the Eurasian Human High Council has dropped bombs on Apocalypse's strongholds in Midwestern America, killing millions. Apocalypse commands the expansion of the seawall defensive system across the Atlantic, fully aware that this will kill all Eurasian residents. The Angel approaches the fortress, looking for his lost mate, Karma. After discovering she's been transformed into one of the Infinites, he chooses to take a stand and sacrifices his own life to destroy the shielding generator at Apocalypse's base, thinking that other heroes resisting Apocalypse may profit from it. The X-Men and their allies use Blinks' teleportation abilities to sneak inside the pens, only to discover that they're empty. They head to the chamber where Apocalypse has stored the Imkran crystal, preparing to send a squad inside to correct the timeline. Destiny states that only she, Illyana, and Bishop can enter because they don't have a living equivalent in the Prime timeline. Meanwhile, Nate Gray has infiltrated the palace, seeking vengeance for the death of his mentor, Forge. He joins forces with Magneto to confront Apocalypse and Holocaust, and the combatants quickly break through a wall to find the other X-Men standing in front of the crystal. While the X-Men defend the crystal from oncoming troops, the trio reach the shard's heart. Illyana, guided by the elderly woman, activates her mutant power and creates a portal for Bishop, transporting him to Israel 20 years ago, where it all began. However, in the crystal room, Colossus goes insane since he doesn't want to lose his sister. He tries to follow her inside, risking the operation, and even his wife cannot stop him. When she gets in his way, he runs her over, killing Shadowcat, who didn't face and she believed he would never harm her. In rage, Gambit severely wounds Colossus just as Illyana emerges from the crystal, only to see her brother die. The X-Men don't notice the Sugar Man entering the crystal, but they do notice the Dark Beast following. However, they fail to stop both from teleporting. Outside, in the streets, Jean Grey and Cyclops are bringing the people they've rescued from the pens to New Jersey. They're unaware that they're being trailed by Havoc, and when Jean notices the deaths of many people in the Midwestern explosion, she believes they're soon to suffer the same fate. As the bombs approach, she raises a telekinetic shield over New York. Havoc, to torture his brother, fires a lethal plasma blast in her back before killing Cyclops. However, he only has a few seconds to celebrate his success as Weapon X stabs him from behind with his claws. Despite the bombing, he's back to be with Jean, who dies in his arms. In the past, Bishop successfully prevents Legion from accidentally killing Xavier. Instead, he slams the psi knife intended for Eric into his own chest, causing Legion to witness nightmare scenes from the Age of Apocalypse. Legion dies from the energy feedback, and the old Bishop fades away as reality reboots. Without Legion to anchor them, the four X-Men who followed him into the past are sucked back into the present. Charles Xavier, Eric Magnus Lensher, and Gabrielle Huller are left to wonder what occurred. Back inside, Nate Gray is fighting Holocaust in the remains of the castle, and in order to weaken his armor, he slams a crystal shard into his chest, but the repercussions are unexpected. Both vanish without a trace. Magneto appears to lose his final battle with Apocalypse, although he was simply acting and taking time to concentrate. In the end, he charges enough magnetic energy to cut Apocalypse in two. As the saga concludes, Magneto pulls his wife and son close to him as the bombs fall a few minutes later, thanking Charles Xavier for such an amazing dream. Epilogue Part 1. Racing the Night. X-Men Prime Number 1. On a dark and stormy night, Jean Grey meets Wolverine in the woods outside the X-Mansion. She pushes him to come inside, but he refuses as long as Sabretooth is present. Inside, Bishop discusses his recent nightmares about another realm with Xavier. Elsewhere, Dennis, a young mutant on his way to Xavier's school to find the X-Men, pauses at a diner. In Wyoming, X-Factor prevents Mystique from bombing a dam. Cyclops and Beast are taking food to Storm, who's looking over a comatose Gambit at the X-Mansion, when they're ambushed by Bishop, who mistakenly assumes they're Apocalypse's slaves. In the Morlock Caverns, a woman named Marrow performs a ritual to summon the first Morlock. In Florida, Rogue and Iceman are dancing at a pub when Trish Tilby's special news story begins. In her report, she notifies the public about the existence of the legacy virus. Dennis slips away when his fellow diners begin speaking out against mutants in the aftermath of the story, but his absence is observed. At the X-Mansion, the X-Men's dismay at Trish's report is interrupted as Xavier senses Nate Gray's approach. In England, Emplate pays a visit to Gail Edgerton. In New York, the restaurant guests catch up with Dennis and begin brutally assaulting him, attracting Xavier's psychic attention. Arcade remotely detonates the Murder World facility used by X-Force. In Wyoming, Havoc unexpectedly loses control of his power, damaging the dam that Mystique intended to blast. Excalibur is getting closer to discovering Sugarman's role in the country's progress in Genosha, which makes him unhappy. In orbit, Colossus takes a group of acolytes to inspect a nearby chunk of ice, which exposes a human trapped therein. In the Morlock tunnels, Marrow encounters the first Morlock, Dark Beast. Back in New York, Xavier and Storm rush to Dennis's side, and the rest of the X-Men arrive as Xavier cradles Dennis Hogan's body, warning them they must fight for a better world, or God help them if this is their fate. Epilogue Part 2. In Cold Blood, X-Men number 53. Nate Gray is on vacation with Cyclops and Jean Grey in Alaska. He awakens from a nightmare in which he's back in the Age of Apocalypse, under attack by the Infinites. He shares his nightmare with Cyclops and Jean before continuing their journey up a mountain as snow falls around them. Nate is concerned about his dreams and how they've recently become a reality when a disfigured Infinite falls from above, endangering Cyclops. Nate is able to assist Cyclops, and as they approach the next ridge, they discover Infinites, humans, and hybrids frozen in the snow. Nate tells Cyclops and Jean about the Infinites from his world, and how they and the mecha mutates, which have blended with humans, were created to attack the human rebels' mutant nullification grids. Then they find protective sea walls from the Age of Apocalypse embedded in another area of the mountain. The three formidable mutants are then ambushed by the remaining Infinites, resulting in a struggle. Cyclops and Nate work well together, and Jean can hold her own against the monstrosities. Jean was able to pick up one of the dead humans' thoughts and learn about the reproducing Infinites, and how more of them are going to be born soon. Cyclops, Jean, and Nate make their way towards the sea wall, unaware that they're being followed by Hatchet 9, a massive and strong Infinite. The trio enter the sea wall, and Nate shows Cyclops and Jean his old house. However, they're now powerless due to the nullification grid. They break off, with Jean going to discover and turn off the nullification grid, and Cyclops and Nate going to the lowest levels to find the Infinite replicator. But as they divide, the deadly Hatchet 9 enters the sea wall, preparing to attack. Epilogue Part 3. A Little Piece of Home, X-Men number 54. Cyclops and Nate Gray are on a hovercycle in the Age of Apocalypse sea wall that's immersed in a mountain in Alaska, looking for the water basin where more Infinites are set to be formed. They discuss the Age of Apocalypse and Nate's prior life while navigating the sea wall fortifications. At the same time, Jean Grey searches the sea wall for the nullification grid that's rendered their mutant powers ineffective, while Hatchet 9, a formidable Infinite, follows her. She discovers the nullification grid and understands it's broken. Cyclops and Nate arrive at the water basin to discover more Infinites being created, and Nate is concerned that the Apocalypse spawns will also pollute this world. Nate wishes to eliminate the Infinites before they're fully grown, but Cyclops recognizes Jean's predicament because of their unique relationship. They need to go help her, but Nate refuses to leave the Infinites. Instead, he wants to destroy them. Cyclops informs Nate that unless Jean destroys the nullification grid, they'll not be able to regain their powers and stop the Infinites. At the nullification grid, Jean does her best to avoid Hatchet 9's strikes while simultaneously arming herself with makeshift weapons. Cyclops and Nate arrive just in time to save her, and while Cyclops rescues Jean, Nate faces Hatchet 9 in a fight. Cyclops and Jean are trapped between the dangerous nullification grid and Hatchet 9, so Nate cuts the floor out from beneath them, causing Hatchet 9 to fire his weapons at the nullification grid, blowing it up just in time for Nate to regain his telekinesis and avoid death. Hatchet 9 appears to have been destroyed, but the Infinites finish their birthing and swarm around Cyclops, Jean, and Nate, who engage them in battle now that their powers have returned. They move the battle outside the sea wall, despite the Infinites' persistent attack. However, the heroes are able to work together successfully, causing the mountain to cave in, swallowing the sea wall and the Infinites inside. Nate blacks out during the process and ends up in the Age of Apocalypse alongside Forge and Sonique. He speaks to them before waking. Cyclops and Jean are with him as they continue their journey through the mountain as a group. concluding thoughts. The Age of Apocalypse is certainly a bold effort at creating an antithesis to the X-Men storyline that existed at the time. However, over 30 years later, one can't help but feel the whole thing to be a little dated. There are still exciting moments, to be sure, such as some of the world building and alternate life paths for certain characters. However, in other ways, it does leave you confused. In any case, I hope you learned something from this massive saga and enjoyed the way it went.